Marcus Reed's fist cracked against the heavy bag so hard the chain rattled against the ceiling mount. He turned, sweat running down his jaw, and pointed directly at the quiet man sitting in the third row. "Hey, yeah, you. The guy who looks like he fixes lawnmowers for a living." He let the crowd laugh before finishing. "You've been watching me all morning like you know something. So let me ask you in front of everybody, you think you could last 30 seconds with me?" The man he was pointing at didn't flinch, didn't straighten up to prove anything. Just looked at Marcus with the kind of stillness that doesn't come from confidence. It comes from somewhere much older than that. What Marcus Reed did not know, what nobody in that gymnasium knew, was that Ethan Walker had once led 12 men through a hostage extraction in a location that still doesn't appear on any declassified map. And the last person who underestimated him that badly ended up zip-tied to a Pakorfik in a warehouse in Kandahar. Drop the city you're watching from in the comments below. I want to see how far this story travels. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button, because this one is going to go places you will not see coming. The gymnasium smelled like floor polish and old ambition. Ethan Walker had been sitting in the same spot for 2 hours. A paper cup of bad coffee balanced on his knee, watching his daughter Lily work through her forms on the far mat with her instructor. She was 10 years old and absolutely serious about everything she did, which was the most Ethan thing about her. She didn't perform. She practiced. There was a difference, and she already understood it. He was not supposed to be the kind of man who drew attention. That was by design. He wore the same kind of clothes every weekend: jeans, a dark gray t-shirt, boots that had been resoled twice. His hair was shorter than fashionable, but not military cropped. Just practical. He had the hands of a man who worked with them for a living, which was true. He was a small aircraft mechanic at a private airfield 20 minutes outside San Diego. And he was good at it, and it asked nothing of him that he wasn't willing to give. That was the point. After 22 years, after the things he'd seen, the men he'd lost, the decisions that still showed up uninvited at 3 in the morning, Ethan Walker had chosen a life that asked nothing dramatic of him. A life that let him make his daughter breakfast, drive her to school, show up. He had been very good, for 5 years, at being unremarkable. Then Marcus Reed pointed at him in front of 200 people, and the morning became something else entirely. Marcus Reed was the kind of talent that communities build mythology around. He was 29 years old, undefeated in regional competition for 4 straight years. And he carried himself the way men do when every room they walk into confirms what they already believe about themselves. He was not wrong about his skill. That was the problem. Being genuinely excellent and having no one in your life willing to tell you what excellence doesn't cover, that combination produces a very particular kind of blind spot. He had won his match 20 minutes ago. A clean takedown against a solid competitor. Technically precise, finished with the kind of controlled submission that drew actual applause from the judges. He deserved the applause. The technique was real, but somewhere between the win and the water bottle, something shifted in him. He started moving through the space like it belonged to him in a way that was different from confidence. He was scanning, looking for something, though he probably couldn't have named it. Looking for the room to conform. One more time, that he was the most capable person in it. That's when he saw Ethan. Not because Ethan was doing anything. That was almost certainly the reason. Every other adult in the gymnasium was leaning forward, filming on phones, calling out encouragement, performing their own version of investment. Ethan was sitting perfectly still, watching Lily on the far mat, his coffee balanced without effort, his face completely unreadable. To most people, stillness looks like absence. Marcus Reed saw absence and interpreted it as disrespect. He walked across the gymnasium floor slowly, deliberately, letting the people nearest him track the movement. He had an instinct for audience, and he used it. He stopped about 10 feet from Ethan's row. Let a beat of silence land. "Hey." His voice was calibrated, not yelling. "Just carrying. Yeah, you. The guy who looks like he fixes lawnmowers for a living." Several people laughed. Not meanly. Not yet. Just reflexively. The way people respond when someone with authority says something meant to land as funny. Ethan looked up from Lily's mat. He looked at Marcus the way a man looks at weather, noting it, categorizing it, deciding whether it required any action. "You've been watching me all morning," Marcus continued, moving a step closer, "like you know something, like you've got an opinion." He spread his hands, a gesture of theatrical invitation. "So go ahead. Let's hear it. You think you could last 30 seconds with me?" Ethan said nothing for a long moment. Lily had noticed. She'd stopped her form, half-turned, watching her father with the specific alertness of a child who has learned to read an adult's stillness. "I'm watching my daughter," Ethan said finally. His voice was flat and even and gave away nothing. "I don't have an opinion about you." "No?" Marcus tilted his head, smiled. "Because that look on your face says different. That's just my face." Another laugh from the crowd. This one was slightly different, a little warmer, a little less certain which direction it was pointing. Marcus felt it and recalibrated. This was not the reaction he expected. Most men, confronted that publicly, either got defensive and loud or got visibly uncomfortable. This man had done neither. He'd answered like the conversation was mildly inconvenient and nothing more. That bothered Marcus more than anger would have. "You got kids in here?" Marcus asked, shifting approach, his tone becoming almost friendly. "My daughter." Ethan nodded toward Lily, the one in the blue gi. Marcus glanced over, then back. "Good for her." He said it the way people say things when they don't care about them. "So you come here every week, sit in the same spot, drink that terrible coffee, watch other people train." He paused. "You ever train yourself?" "Used to." "Used to." Marcus repeated it with a slow nod. "Performing consideration." "What happened?" "Life." "Life." Marcus said it like it was a disappointing answer. "See? That's the thing that gets me. Guys your age, no offense, they come in here. They watch, and they've got this look, like they think they understand what's happening on the mat, because they did some push-ups 20 years ago." He shrugged. "I just wonder what that's like. To be so sure you understand something you stopped doing a long time ago." Ethan looked at him steadily. "I'm not sure about anything." "Really?" Marcus crossed his arms. "Because you've been sitting there for 2 hours, looking real sure. That's concentration. Different thing." From across the gymnasium, Lily was watching her father with complete attention. She knew something was happening that mattered. She didn't know exactly what yet. Marcus decided to push. "You know what I think?" He took another step closer. He was now inside the distance that people normally leave between themselves and strangers, and he knew it, and he was doing it deliberately. "I think guys like you quiet. Keep to yourself. Act like nothing impresses you. I think that's a cover. I think deep down, you're just scared. Scared that if you actually tried something, you'd find out you can't do it anymore." Ethan didn't move, didn't blink at the expected rate, just looked at Marcus with that same flat, even quality that had bothered Marcus from the first moment. "You might be right," Ethan said. That was the last answer Marcus expected. He actually paused. Reset. "So you admit it." "I admit I might be scared. Fear's not a weakness. It's information." Ethan picked up his coffee cup, looked into it like he was considering whether there was enough left to bother with. "What you do with it is the question." Philosophical. Marcus smiled with half his face. "I love it. A philosophical mechanic." He looked around, making sure the people nearby were still with him. Most of them were. "Here's a concrete question for you. My concrete offer." He pointed at the center mat. 30 seconds. You and me. Let's find out what 20 years ago actually got you." Silence spread from that point outward. The way silence does when a moment tips past performance and becomes something real. Lily stepped off her mat. She walked across the gymnasium floor, which she was not supposed to do during training hours, and stood next to her father. She put her hand in his. Ethan looked down at her. She was looking at Marcus with an expression that was part concern and part something else, a kind of measuring look that she had learned from watching her father over a decade of quiet mornings. "Your dad scared?" Marcus said to Lily. His voice was still light, still performing for the room. But the fact that he said it to a 10-year-old made several people in the crowd shift. Lily looked at Marcus for a moment. Then she looked up at her father. "Dad," she said quietly. Just that. Just his name. But the way she said it, not fearful, not pleading, just anchored. Like she was reminding him that she was there. And she was watching. And she trusted whatever he was about to decide. Ethan held her hand for a moment. Then he looked back at Marcus. His expression had not changed at all. But something behind it had. "You said 30 seconds, Ethan said. "That's what I said." "Okay." Ethan stood up. He handed his coffee cup to the woman sitting to his left, who took it without quite knowing why. He kissed the top of Lily's head and said, quietly enough that only she could hear, "Stay right there." Then he walked toward the center mat. The gymnasium got very quiet. Not the theatrical quiet of performance. The real quiet. The kind that happens when a room collectively realizes it may have misread something important, and doesn't yet know how badly. One of the other fathers in the stands, a man named Dave Kowalski, who had watched Marcus fight a dozen times and considered himself something of an informal expert, leaned over to the woman beside him and said, "This is going to be rough to watch." He meant rough for Ethan. He was about to be very wrong. Marcus Reed had won 41 consecutive competitions in the last 4 years. He had a black belt that he'd earned through legitimate work and real time on the mat. And he had trained under a coach who had trained under a coach who had competed at a national level. His fundamentals were excellent. His conditioning was better than excellent. He had a read on opponents that most fighters spend a decade developing. And he had developed it in half that time. He was, by any reasonable measure, an elite regional fighter. He looked at Ethan Walker, standing at the center of the mat, shoulders relaxed, weight distributed without apparent effort, hands loose at his sides, and cataloged what he saw. 45 years old, maybe 200 pounds, no visible fighter's stance, no pre-engagement ritual, none of the small physical tells that experienced competitors develop. The man was just standing there, the way someone stands in line at a grocery store. Marcus allowed himself a private thought. This would be quick. He moved first. He used a technique he'd deployed successfully in 17 of his last 20 matches: a feint left. Explosive drive right, close the distance and force the reaction. Against most opponents, the feint alone was enough to generate the response he needed. He was that fast. Ethan didn't react to the feint. He didn't react because he hadn't looked at Marcus's shoulders. He was watching Marcus's hips, and the hips never lied. Marcus drove right and found that Ethan had already moved. Not fast, not what an observer would call fast. More like Ethan had simply been standing in a slightly different place than Marcus had calculated. The geometry was wrong. Marcus had to adjust mid-movement, which cost him the explosive advantage, which meant when he reached for the clinch, his hands found air. He recovered. He was good enough to recover. He reset. Circled. Read the situation. Ethan stood in the same easy posture. His breathing hadn't changed. Marcus tacked again. This time a combination jab. Cross. Shoot for the takedown on the third beat. It was fast enough that it usually landed before the opponent fully processed the sequence. Ethan blocked the jab with the kind of economy that said his arms had done this 100,000 times. The cross he slipped by, moving his head exactly as far as he needed to move it and no further. And the takedown Marcus shot and felt both of Ethan's hands land on his shoulders with precision. Not strength, just placement, redirecting the momentum in a way that had Marcus going sideways instead of forward. And suddenly he was at an angle he had not chosen, exposed in a way he had not anticipated. He got back to his feet fast. He was very good at getting back to his feet. The crowd was silent. Dave Kowalski had stopped leaning toward the woman next to him. He was sitting straight up, holding his phone without having pressed record, which was unusual for him. Marcus came back harder. He was not rattled, he was a competitor. And competitors don't rattle from a minute of not landing, but something had entered his awareness that he was working to suppress. A question he didn't want to ask. He threw a combination he had never lost behind. 7 techniques in sequence. Fluid, the product of 4 years of daily training. Fast, precise, devastating when it landed. Ethan moved through it, like water moves around a stone, not blocking everything. Some things he slipped. Some he deflected with minimal contact. He simply wasn't there for. But never once did he look rushed. Never once did he look like he was working. He looked like a man solving an arithmetic problem he had already solved several times before. At the 2-minute mark, well past Marcus's proposed 30 seconds, because nobody had stopped the clock and nobody wanted to, Marcus threw a strike that committed too much weight. He knew it when it left him. A fraction of a second of knowing. Ethan stepped inside it. His hand went to Marcus's wrist. His other hand went to Marcus's shoulder. The movement that followed was not large. Somebody watching from across the room might not have seen exactly what happened. But Marcus's feet left the mat and he landed on his back with the specific impact of a controlled takedown, hard enough to be real, not hard enough to injure. Ethan took 2 steps back. He did not stand over Marcus, did not adopt any posture of victory. He stood where he was. Wait easy, and waited. Marcus lay on his back for a moment that lasted longer than he expected. The ceiling of the gymnasium was white with fluorescent lighting and 2 industrial fans and a water stain in the northeast corner that someone had stopped caring about. He stared at the water stain. He was not injured. He was not unconscious. He was not even physically tired. He was disoriented in a way that had nothing to do with his body. A sensation of the floor being uneven, of the room having rearranged itself while he was looking somewhere else. He sat up. He looked at Ethan. Ethan met his eyes without aggression, without satisfaction, without any of the performance markers that Marcus had always associated with winning. He looked like a man who had done something necessary and was now waiting to see what would happen next. Marcus got to his feet. The gymnasium was so quiet that the air conditioning was audible. He expected Ethan to say something. Some men, when they win, can't not say something. The silence is too much for them. And they fill it. Ethan did not fill it. He simply looked at Marcus and waited. Lily was standing at the edge of the mat where her father had told her to stay. Her arms were at her sides. Her chin was level. She was watching Marcus the way her father had taught her not to be watched, but to see. Marcus became aware of the audience again. The gymnasium full of people who had come to watch matches, who had watched this match, who were now watching him stand in the middle of the mat, having just been put on the floor by a man in jeans. He felt the heat move up the back of his neck. How he started. Stopped. Started again. What are you? Ethan looked at him for a moment. Tired, Ethan said quietly. And I have to get my daughter lunch. He walked to the edge of the mat, stepped off, and went to Lily. She took his hand without a word. They walked toward the exit together. Marcus stood in the center of the mat. Around him, the gymnasium slowly, tentatively, began to come back to life, voices resuming. Phones rising, the machinery of a normal Saturday morning, trying to reassert itself over what had just happened. Dave Kowalski looked down at his phone, still not having pressed record. What? He said to nobody in particular. Just happened? Ethan didn't look back. He had learned a long time ago that looking back over your shoulder was a habit that cost more than it earned. Whatever was behind you, you had already dealt with it. Or you hadn't. Looking didn't change either outcome. He pushed the gymnasium door open, and the San Diego afternoon came in warm and flat and smelling like cut grass from the park across the street. Lily walked beside him, matching his stride. Her gym bag swung over one shoulder. They made it to the car. He unlocked it. She got in. He got in. He started the engine. "Dad, Dad," she said. "Yeah, that man was wrong about you." Ethan pulled out of the parking space, checked his mirrors, watched a kid on a bicycle navigate the crosswalk. "He didn't know me," Ethan said. "That's what I mean." Lily looked out her window. "He thought he did, but he didn't." Ethan said nothing for a moment. "People do that," he said finally. "Does it bother you?" "Used to." "What changed?" He thought about it. Not performing thought, actually, considering the question. The way Lily deserved. "I stopped needing them to know," he said. "Once I stopped needing it, it stopped mattering what they thought." Lily was quiet for half a block. "I'm glad you stood up," she said. Me too. Because he was rude. Yeah. And because I was watching. He looked at her sideways. Yeah. She nodded, like she'd confirmed something to herself. Then she looked back out her window at the passing afternoon and said, "Can we get the good tacos? Not the close ones, the other ones. The other ones are 20 minutes away." "I know." "Okay," he said. "The other ones." He drove. She watched the city slide past her window. The radio played something neither of them commented on. The afternoon held steady around them, the way good afternoons do. The whole comfortable, ordinary weight of it. Two people in a car going somewhere. Ethan Walker had spent 22 years training to survive the worst moments the world could produce. He had survived most of them. He had lost things that couldn't be recovered. He had carried those losses the way you carry things when you've decided the carrying is worth it. This was what he'd carried them for. Not the gymnasium, not putting Marcus Reed on the mat in front of 200 people, not the proof of anything. This, a 20-minute drive for tacos, a girl with a gym bag and a sensible question, and the whole afternoon ahead of her. He had built this life deliberately, from the wreckage of a harder one. He had built it to be small enough to protect and rich enough to matter. He had built it knowing that its value was invisible to most people who looked at it from the outside. He was fine with that. He had been fine with that for 5 years. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, driving through the warm San Diego Saturday with his daughter beside him, was that Marcus Reed was still standing in the middle of that mat, still processing, still turning a question over in his mind that was going to become an obsession before the week was out. What he didn't know was that the thing he'd left behind him in that gymnasium was not over. It had, in fact, only just begun. Marcus Reed did not sleep that night. He told himself he was fine. He stretched, showered, ate the same post-training meal. He always ate chicken, rice, a handful of almonds, and sat down at his kitchen table with the same discipline that had gotten him 41 consecutive wins. He told himself that what happened in the gymnasium was an anomaly, a fluke of geometry and poor footing, and the fact that he hadn't been fully warmed up for an informal exchange. He told himself these things with the same conviction he brought to everything else in his life. But the ceiling above his bed had a water stain in the northwest corner, and at 2 in the morning, he was staring at it. He kept running the sequence. Not the whole match, just the moment. The moment he drove right, and Ethan was simply no longer in the place Marcus had calculated him to be. Not fast, not dramatic, just wrong. The geometry was wrong, and in that single fraction of a second, Marcus had understood something he couldn't yet name. Something that lived below language and below pride and below the 41 wins and the black belt and everything he'd built his sense of himself on. He didn't understand it, but he felt it, and it sat in his chest like a coal. By 3 in the morning, he had his phone out. He wasn't looking for Ethan Walker. Not yet. He was just looking the way a man looks when his mind has a question it hasn't admitted to asking. He searched fight breakdowns. He searched body mechanics. He watched 3 different videos on military combatives and told himself it was just research. Just general curiosity. Nothing to do with a mechanic in jeans who'd put him on the mat in front of his students. At 4 in the morning, he searched the name. Ethan Walker, San Diego, mechanic. He found very little. A work listing for an airfield south of the city. A single mention in a community newsletter about a fundraiser for a youth center 2 years ago. A school event photograph where a man matching Ethan's description stood in the back row with the other parents. Not centered, not positioned for attention, just there. Marcus put his phone down. He stared at the ceiling. The coal in his chest burned a little hotter. He picked the phone back up. It was Marcus's coach, Danny Reyes, who first suggested something was wrong with the story Marcus was telling himself. Danny had been training fighters for 19 years. He had a gym that smelled like rubber, and old sweat and the particular mineral tang of ambition. And he had seen every species of fighter that ambition produced. He'd seen the talented ones, and the hard-working ones, and the rare ones who were both. He'd seen the ones who peaked early, and the ones who developed late, and the ones who burned out before they ever found their ceiling. He thought he had a reasonable read on Marcus Reed. He thought Marcus was the real thing, talented, disciplined, genuinely exceptional. He also thought Marcus was heading somewhere he didn't want to go. Had thought it for about a year. Had said it twice. Obliquely, the way coaches say things when they know the fighter isn't ready to hear it directly. Marcus came into the gym Monday morning with the kind of energy that coaches recognize: tight, controlled, performing calm over something that wasn't calm at all. "Tell me about Saturday," Danny said. Before Marcus could start wrapping his hands, Marcus' jaw moved. "Nothing to tell. I heard there was something to tell." "Who told you?" Raphael was there with his son. Danny crossed his arms. He was a short man, built square, with the patient quality of someone who has waited out 1,000 rounds of denial. He said, "A man put you down in about 2 minutes. It was an informal thing." "Okay." He got lucky with a redirect. "I was off balance from a bad step." "Okay," Danny said again. "The same way." Marcus looked at him. "Why do you keep saying okay like that?" "Because you haven't asked me the question you actually want to ask." Silence. Marcus's hands were still at his sides, wraps half done. The gym was mostly empty at this hour, one other fighter running footwork drills at the far end. The rhythm of it, distant and steady. "He moved wrong," Marcus said finally. "He didn't move like a trained fighter. He moved like, I don't know how to describe it. Different. Like the rules he was working from were different than the rules I was working from." Danny nodded slowly. "He wasn't competing," Danny said. "Was he?" "What?" "He wasn't in a competition mindset. He wasn't thinking about winning." "That's what you're describing." Danny uncrossed his arms. "You've been trained to win matches. Your whole system, your timing, your reads, your setups, all of it is calibrated around a competitive opponent who wants to defeat you. Someone who is operating outside that framework isn't fighting by the same rules. Your reads don't apply." Marcus stared at him. So what was he thinking about? Danny was quiet for a moment. "That's the question, isn't it?" he said. Marcus found out what Ethan was thinking about. What Ethan had spent 22 years thinking about on a Thursday afternoon. Through a chain of connections he hadn't planned and would later find himself wishing he'd never followed. It started with a man named Phil Granger. Phil was 62, retired Navy, and he had a habit of showing up at the youth center on Thursday afternoons to help with the equipment inventory for the martial arts program there. He was the kind of man who filled space with noise, not unpleasantly, just constantly, and he knew things about people, the way small community veterans know things. Through cross-referencing, through the informal information networks that exist between people who've served, through 30 years of being in rooms where names come up. Marcus had been asking around. Not directly. Not with the admission of what he was doing. He'd asked about the airfield. He'd asked about the program Ethan had been mentioned in connection with at the youth center 2 years ago. He'd asked, casually, and with what he thought was appropriate to cover, whether anyone knew anything about the mechanic who'd been at the gymnasium Saturday. Phil Granger had been in the back of the room when Marcus asked the second question. Phil had not said anything at the time. He called Marcus on Thursday. "I hear you've been asking about Ethan Walker," Phil said. Marcus kept his voice even. "Just curious about who he is. He showed up at our event, and there was an exchange. I like to know who I'm dealing with." Phil was quiet for a second. "I'll tell you what I know, because I think you need to hear it. But I want to be clear about something first." "Okay. I'm telling you because I think it might actually help you," Phil said. "Not because I think you deserve to know it. You understand the difference?" Marcus did not like the distinction, but he said, "Yeah, I understand." "Ethan Hayes," Phil said. Marcus frowned. "Walker, his name is Walker, that's what he goes by now. His name is Ethan Hayes. Commander Ethan Hayes. Retired. 22 years, Naval Special Warfare. Last operational posting was leading a SEAL team out of Coronado that I am not at liberty to discuss in specifics, because some of what they did is still not public record and probably won't be in my lifetime." Phil paused. He left service 5 years ago after his wife died, took his daughter, and built a different life. Changed his professional name. His wife's maiden name was Walker. He uses it Professionally, socially, everywhere. Marcus said nothing. The information was moving through him like something cold. He trained operators, Phil continued. Not just led them, trained them. Hand to hand. Combat systems, close quarters, the curriculum he developed is still being used. He also has time in with hostage rescue protocols. Executive protection, multi-threat engagement. Phil's voice was measured. Not impressed. Exactly, more like matter of fact about something that happened to be impressive. He is, in the estimation of people who know more about this than I do, one of the better trained human beings in the country. Marcus sat with that for a moment. He's a mechanic, Marcus said. He is now. Yes. Phil's voice had something in it that wasn't quite sympathy. He chose that. That's the part you might want to think about. The line was quiet. Why are you telling me this? Marcus asked. Because you're going to find out anyway, Phil said. You have that energy, the kind that doesn't let things go. I'd rather you find out from me than from doing something that makes it worse. Another pause. Don't go after him. Son, you went after him once and it went the way it went. Let it be a lesson and move on. Marcus thanked him. He hung up. He sat in his car in the parking lot of his gym for 11 minutes. Which he knew, because he looked at the clock when he sat down and looked again when he started the engine. The coal in his chest had changed character. It wasn't just burning anymore. It was organized. It had become something with a shape. He was not going to let it go. The problem, the real problem, the one that Marcus could not yet see clearly enough to name, was that his pride had gotten tangled up with something else. It had gotten tangled up with his identity. Marcus Reed had built himself from the outside in. That was the truth he would not have admitted to anyone, probably including himself, but it was the truth. His skill was real. His work ethic was real. The hours on the mat, the discipline, the study, the sacrifice, all real. But the structure he had placed around those real things, the mythology of the undefeated fighter, the reputation, the way people looked at him when he walked into a room, that structure had become load-bearing. He'd stopped noticing when it happened. The external confirmation had quietly become necessary in a way that was different from motivating. When Ethan Walker had put him on the mat, it hadn't just been a loss, it had been a question about the entire structure. And Marcus was not a man who handled existential questions well when they arrived without warning, from unexpected directions in front of an audience. He spent the next 3 days moving through the motions of his life, while something underneath changed shape. He trained. He coached his afternoon class. He ate correctly, slept adequately, answered messages. But there was a conversation happening under all of it that he couldn't shut off. He replayed the gymnasium. He replayed Phil Granger's voice. He replayed the way Ethan had stood on the mat, that ease, that absolute absence of performance, the way a man moves when he has nothing left to prove because he has already been to places where proof stopped being the currency. And each time Marcus replayed it, the conclusion he landed on was the same one. It was wrong, not the outcome. The outcome was what it was, but the situation being treated as a lesson, being helped up, being handled with the specific care of someone who knew exactly how much damage they could do and deliberately chose not to, that was what stuck. That was the thing he couldn't metabolize. He did not want to be a lesson. He did not want to be handled. He did not want the quiet mercy of a man who could have embarrassed him and chose not to. Because that mercy implied a hierarchy that Marcus refused to accept. He wanted a different ending. He wanted, though he would not have used this word, a rematch. Not a formal one. Not a sanctioned competition with judges and rules and an audience that would remember the result. Something different. Something that would let Marcus walk away with a version of events that restored the structure he needed. He called 2 men he knew. Their names were Curtis Webb and Jonah Park. Curtis was 26, a training partner of Marcus's for 2 years, with a background in wrestling and a recent interest in kickboxing. He was large in the way that strong young men are large when they haven't yet learned that size is only one variable. He was also loyal to Marcus in the uncomplicated way of someone who had benefited from Marcus's reputation and hadn't examined that benefit closely enough. Jonah was 24. Quick and aggressive, with a chip on his shoulder that predated his involvement in martial arts, and probably predated high school. He fought with the specific energy of someone who has something to settle with the world in general and is currently settling it with the nearest available target. Marcus met them at a bar he knew on a Tuesday night. He bought the first round. He did not immediately tell them what he wanted. He talked about training, about an upcoming regional event, about a judge's decision from the previous month that he still considered questionable. He established the mood, the particular temperature of grievance. Then he told them about Ethan Walker. He told the story the way he needed it to be told. He omitted the fact that he'd instigated it. He omitted the part where Lily had been there. He described the gymnasium as a competitive environment, and the exchange as a challenge that had been answered with a technique he hadn't seen, which had likely involved some prior sat surface. He said this with the casual confidence of someone who believes their own revision, because they've told it enough times. He said the man had a military background, which maybe explained the cheap shot, and that he felt the record needed correcting. Curtis and Jonah listened with the receptivity of men who were already on the side they were going to end up on. "So, what are you thinking?" Curtis said. "I want to have a conversation," Marcus said. At his workshop, late. No audience. Just a conversation. Jonah turned his glass. The kind of conversation that doesn't need witnesses. The kind of conversation that corrects the record, Marcus said. Oh, Curtis nodded, slowly. When? Friday night. He works late on Fridays. The airfield job sometimes runs until 8. 9. He's usually at his private workshop by 10. "You've been watching him," Jonah said. "Not an accusation, an observation." "I know who I'm dealing with," Marcus said. "That's just being prepared." He said it cleanly, without hesitation, because he'd stopped being fully honest with himself about what he was doing several days ago. The coaching out of honesty happens gradually, and then completely, the way most things that erode do. He bought the second round. What Marcus did not know, what his research and his phone calls and his week of planning had not uncovered, was that Ethan Walker had already noticed him. Not because Ethan was watching Marcus, he wasn't. He had gone home from the gymnasium, gotten tacos with Lily, spent the rest of Saturday afternoon helping her with a school project about ocean ecosystems, and gone to bed that night without losing an hour of sleep to Marcus Reed's bruised ego. But Ethan was a man who paid attention. It was not something he'd been able to switch off. 22 years of training and operational experience had rewired his awareness at a level below conscious thought. He noticed when things in his environment changed pattern. He noticed when a car slowed near the airfield. 2 mornings in a row. He noticed the second time he saw the same gray truck in his neighborhood within a week, parked in a different spot each time. He didn't alarm. He didn't assume. He simply noted, filed it, changed one element of his routine. On Wednesday, he mentioned it to his daughter's school quietly, without drama, that he was working later this week and his neighbor Carol would be picking Lily up on Friday. He gave Carol a bottle of wine and a casserole for the inconvenience. On Thursday, he had a conversation with a man named Terrence who had served with him in the early years, a man who now worked in private security and owed Ethan a favor that was large enough that Terrence brought it up, unprompted, every time they spoke. Ethan called in part of the favor. "Just awareness," he told Terrence. "I'm not asking for anything else. Just want to know if the pattern means what I think it means." "You think it does?" Terrence asked. "I think a young man with something to prove and the wrong friends figured out where I work." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "I've been hoping I'm wrong." "And if you're not?" Ethan looked out the window of his workshop. The evening was settling in over the airfield. The last light going orange over the flat land, the smell of oil and metal and warm air. "Then I handle it," he said. Friday arrived the way difficult things arrive, not dramatically, just inevitably, the way weather you've watched building on the horizon finally reaches you. Ethan worked until 8:30. He was rebuilding a carburetor for a Cessna 172 that an older pilot had owned for 30 years. And treated like a child, the man came in every 6 months, regardless of whether anything needed fixing, just to have someone he trusted look at it. Ethan respected that. He'd spent most of the evening working on it, listening to a baseball game on a small radio, the work steady and absorbing. He drove to his workshop at 9. The workshop was separate from the airfields, a small building at the back of a property he leased on the edge of the neighborhood, where he did private mechanical work on weekends and evenings. He restored things there: old engines, sometimes small boats, occasionally a motorcycle. He liked the work for the same reason he liked the airfield job. It required complete attention and left no room for anything else. He had left the lights on inside. He never left the lights on inside. He walked to the door, unlocked it, and pushed it open. He stepped inside. He did not rush. He did not reach for anything. He stood in the open doorway for a moment. Let his eyes adjust to the contrast. Let the room come into focus. His workbench was on the left. 2 chairs he never used were against the far wall. A shelving unit ran along the right side with organized parts, fluids, and tools. Everything was as he'd left it. He stepped fully inside, closed the door behind him. He sat down at his workbench. He waited. They came at 10:14. Ethan heard the truck before he saw the headlights. Through the workshop's small side window, an engine running without the small mechanical confidence of a well-maintained vehicle. Slightly rough at idle, the kind of thing he'd have tuned differently if it had come into his bay. He did not move from his workbench. The door opened without a knock. Marcus came in first, Curtis and Jonah behind him, spacing themselves with the deliberate awareness of men who have thought about this moment more than they've thought about most moments in their lives. The workshop smelled like oil and metal and an engine that had been running recently. Ethan turned on his stool to face them. He looked at Marcus, then Curtis, then Jonah. The assessment was complete and expressionless and took approximately 2 seconds. "You've been watching my shop," Ethan said. Marcus stopped. He had prepared for several opening gambits from Ethan, and this was not one of them. "We need to finish something." "No," Ethan said. "You need to finish something. There's a difference." His voice was the same as it had been in the gymnasium, the same flat, even register that didn't rise or perform. The sound of a man who was not surprised and was sizing out to spend the next few minutes. "You embarrassed me," Marcus said. "You embarrassed yourself," Ethan said. "I was just there when it happened." Marcus's jaw tightened. "You don't get to I know about you," Ethan said. Not loudly, not as a threat, just as a fact being delivered. Commander Hayes, Navy SEAL, elite training program, classified operations. Marcus took a step forward, and his voice had an edge now, the composure cracking at the seam. "I know exactly who you are, which means I know that what happened Saturday wasn't luck." "No," Ethan agreed. "It wasn't. Which means you hustled me. You sat there in your regular clothes acting like a regular person, and you hustled me." Ethan looked at him for a moment. "I sat there watching my daughter," he said. "You came to me. You chose the audience. You pointed at me in front of 200 people and called me out by name. I declined twice. You insulted Lily." His voice stayed level, but something in it sharpened fractionally. "I don't hustle people, Marcus. I just stopped pretending to be less than I am when it stopped serving a purpose." Marcus stared at him. The workshop was very quiet. Curtis shifted his weight. Jonah was very still, reading the room in a way that suggested his instincts were better than his judgment. "We're not here for a debate," Curtis said. Ethan looked at Curtis, not with aggression, with a specific kind of assessment that made Curtis go quiet without being entirely sure why. "Son," Ethan said, still not raising his voice, "you should think carefully about the next 30 seconds. There's 3 of us," Curtis said. But the bravado had taken a small step backward without his permission. "I know," Ethan said. "I'm asking you to think about that. Not telling you it changes anything." He turned back to Marcus. "You could walk out of here right now. All 3 of you. Nothing happens. You go home. You sleep, you train tomorrow. Your career continues. That's available to you right now," Marcus said. I'm not leaving. Ethan nodded once. Slow. Like a man accepting a delivered package he didn't order. He stood up from the stool. What happened in the next 4 minutes would be described differently by each of the 3 men who experienced it. Curtis, later, would have difficulty accounting for this. He knew he'd moved first. He was the first to commit. Going for a rush that had worked for him in wrestling rooms and twice in unsanctioned. What he remembered next was the specific sensation of his own momentum being redirected, not stopped. Redirected, and finding himself against the shelving unit with both wrists held in a grip that was calm and total and made movement feel like a choice that wasn't available. Ethan said, quietly against his ear, "Stay there," and Curtis stayed there. Jonah came in from the side. Fast, with the scrambling energy of someone whose system runs on aggression. He was quick enough that the angle was genuinely decent. Ethan released Curtis and moved into Jonah's attack rather than away from it inside the angle. Past the committed strike. His hand going to the back of Jonah's jacket collar, with the matter-of-fact certainty of a man removing something from a shelf he's used 1,000 times. Jonah went down to one knee. The hold kept him there without visible effort. "I need you to stay down," Ethan said. Jonah stayed down. Marcus came last, which was both the tactically wrong choice and perhaps the only honest one he had to come himself. Had to be the one who tried it, because the alternative was living the rest of his life knowing he'd sent 2 other men to do what he wasn't willing to do. He came with everything he had. He was better than Curtis. Better than Jonah. He was, by any legitimate measure, an elite fighter. His technique was real. His speed was real. His commitment was real. None of it was enough. Ethan met him the same way he'd met him in the gymnasium, not opposing the force. Not matching the aggression, just moving through the geometry of it with that maddening, unhurried precision. He let Marcus extend, let the commitment pass its peak. And then he was somewhere else, and Marcus was facing the wrong direction with Ethan's arm across his shoulders and the specific mechanical disadvantage of a control position that made struggle feel like running in wet sand. Ethan brought them both to the floor. Not a throw, not a slam. A controlled descent. The kind that says I could do this differently, but this is what I chose. He held Marcus there. The workshop was completely quiet except for breathing. Ethan said nothing for a moment. He let the quiet do the work. Then, "I tried to give you an exit." Marcus's cheek was against the workshop floor. He was not injured, he was not in danger. He was simply held, completely, by a force that felt less like strength and more like inevitability. "I know," Marcus said. His voice came out smaller than he intended. "This is the second time you've brought it to me," Ethan said. "I need you to hear me when I tell you there shouldn't be a third." Silence. "Not because I'll hurt you," Ethan said. "Because I won't. And you need to stop making me prove that to you." He let Marcus go. He stood up, stepped back, gave the room back to them. Curtis was still against the shelving unit, standing now, his arms at his sides. Jonah was upright, hands on his knees, looking at the floor with the particular expression of a young man recalibrating something. Marcus got to his feet slowly. He stood in the middle of Ethan's workshop, in the oil and metal air, under the fluorescent lights, and he looked at the man who had just put all 3 of them down without breaking a sweat, and without, as far as Marcus could tell, raising his heart rate to anything above a light walk. "Why?" Marcus said. He wasn't sure what he was asking. The question was bigger than one word, and he didn't have the rest of the language for it. Ethan looked at him. "Because being the strongest person in the room doesn't mean anything," Ethan said, "if you use it to make people afraid of you." He picked up the rag he'd been using at the workbench and set it aside. "I have a daughter. She watches everything I do. Every decision I make in front of her is a lesson, whether I intend it or not." His voice was still even, still without performance. "I refuse to let her watch me destroy someone who was hurting his own future without understanding it." Marcus stared at him. "You knew," Marcus said. "Saturday. You knew who you were dealing with the whole time." "I knew you were angry," Ethan said. "I knew you were talented. I knew you were in a room full of people who were confirming things about yourself that weren't fully true. And I knew that confronting me in front of them was the worst mistake you could make." He paused. "And I knew you were going to make it anyway, because that's where you were." The silence stretched. Jonah spoke first, unexpectedly. "So why didn't you just say that?" His voice was genuinely curious, stripped of the aggression that had been in it 20 minutes ago. "In the gym. Why didn't you just say any of that?" Ethan looked at him. "Would you have heard it?" Jonah thought about it. A long moment. "No," he said. "Probably not." That's why. Curtis and Jonah left the workshop without speaking. Not out of shame, or not only out of shame. Out of a kind of stunned quiet that sometimes descends on people when they've participated in something they expected to go one way and it went so fundamentally differently that they need to be alone to process which direction they're now facing. Marcus stood in the workshop doorway. He should have left. He knew he should have left, but his feet weren't cooperating. And something in him was not ready to let the moment close without one more thing being said. Though he didn't yet know what thing. "You're not going to call the police," he said. "No. Why?" Ethan was back at his workbench. He had picked up a part he'd been working on, a small housing unit from an engine, worn at the seam, and was examining it the way he examined everything, with complete attention. "Because you're 29 years old and your career is real and you built it with real work," Ethan said. "And because what you need isn't consequences. It's a different kind of education." He set the part down, looked at Marcus. "And because I remember being the kind of person who thought physical capability was the same thing as worth. Someone let me be wrong about that without destroying me for it. I'm doing the same thing." Marcus felt something in his chest move. Not the coal, something different. Something that had been very tightly organized around the coal and was now loosening. "Who was that person?" Marcus said. "Who let you be wrong?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. "My commanding officer," he said. "First deployment. I was 24. I made a call I thought was the right call. It wasn't. He let me understand that privately instead of publicly." He looked at the engine part in his hand. "He retired a year later. I never told him what that cost him in terms of not making an example of me. What it gave me." A pause. "I think about it when I have the chance to make a similar choice." Marcus looked at the floor, looked at the man, looked at the floor again. "I didn't know," he said. "Not about the SEAL background. Not about the classified operations. About something else. Something simpler. I didn't know that someone could be that good and that he searched for the word." "Quiet?" Ethan offered. "Yeah." Marcus exhaled. "Quiet. Skill doesn't require an audience," Ethan said. "That's something it takes a while to learn. Most people learn it the hard way." A long silence. "Go home." "Marcus," Ethan said, not unkindly, the way a man sends someone home who needs sleep more than they need another conversation. "Get back on your mat tomorrow. You're good. You've got real talent. Don't waste it on this." Marcus nodded. He stepped out of the workshop. The night air was warm and flat and smelled like the same cut grass it always smelled like at this hour. And somewhere, a dog was barking 2 streets over with the comfortable persistence of an animal who has found something interesting and intends to document it thoroughly. He walked to the truck. Curtis and Jonah were already inside. Nobody spoke on the drive back. Marcus stared out the passenger window at the passing dark and felt the thing in his chest, the coal. The organized shape of his humiliation and pride and refusal begin, slowly, to change into something he didn't have a name for yet. He would find the name for it eventually. It would take time, and it would not be comfortable, and there would be several more nights of staring at the northwest corner of his ceiling before it resolved into anything he could work with. But it had started. In a workshop that smelled like oil and old metal, and the particular quiet of a man who had learned. At enormous cost, the difference between power and the willingness to use it. Something in Marcus Reed had cracked open. He wasn't grateful for it yet, but he would be. The drive home took Marcus 23 minutes. He knew, because he watched the clock on the dashboard the entire way. Not because he cared what time it was, but because he needed something specific to look at. Something that moved in a direction. something that told him the world was still operating according to rules he understood. Curtis dropped him at his car without a word. Jonah didn't look up from his phone. There was a specific quality to the silence in that truck, not uncomfortable. Not angry, just hollowed out. The silence of men who have collectively experienced something that none of them are ready to narrate yet. Marcus drove home alone. He sat in his driveway for 6 minutes before going inside. His apartment looked the same as it always looked. Clean, organized, his training equipment in its designated corner. His competition medals arranged on the shelf he'd built specifically for them. He'd arranged those medals himself. Gotten a level to make sure the shelf was perfectly straight. Spent an afternoon getting it exactly right. He stood in front of them now and tried to feel what he normally felt when he looked at them. He felt nothing. Not disdain. Not indifference. Nothing. Like looking at photographs of someone else's life and being able to appreciate them without being moved by them. He went to bed. He did not look at the ceiling. He was asleep in 4 minutes, which was unusual, and his sleep was deep, and without the coal, and without the question, and without Marcus Reed, the undefeated fighter, needing anything from the dark. He woke up in the morning, and the first thing he thought about was not himself. He thought about Ethan Walker, choosing not to call the police. The fallout from Friday night arrived not in a single wave but in the slow, steady way that consequences arrive when they're not dramatic enough to be visible all at once. It started with Phil Granger. Phil had a network that operated the way all veteran networks operate efficiently, quietly, and with a comprehensive disregard for the geographical distances between its members. Phil knew what had happened at the workshop by Saturday morning. Marcus didn't know how. And when he eventually thought to wonder about it, he decided the answer was that Phil Granger simply knew things the way certain people do, because they've spent decades being the kind of person other people call. Phil did not call Marcus. He called Marcus's coach. Danny Reyes picked up the phone at 7 on Saturday morning while making coffee. Listened to Phil's account of Friday night for 4 minutes. Said 3 words and hung up. The 3 words were, "I'll handle it." Marcus arrived at the gym at 8 for his regular Saturday session to find Danny sitting on the apron of the center mat with his arms crossed and the specific expression of a coach who has decided that a conversation is happening whether the other person is ready or not. "Sit down," Danny said. Marcus sat down. "Tell me about last night." Marcus said nothing for a moment. He was calculating, not whether to tell Danny, but how much of what he told himself was the story, and how much of it was the truth. "I went to talk to him," Marcus said, "with Curtis and Jonah. Yes, at his private workshop. At 10 at night. Yes." Danny looked at him, not with anger, which Marcus had prepared for, with something worse, with the specific exhaustion of a man who has invested significantly in someone and is watching that investment make choices that have nothing to do with what was invested. "He put all 3 of you down," Danny said. "Yes. And then let you walk." "Yes." Danny was quiet for a moment. The gym was empty at this hour. The equipment sat in its clean arrangement. The bags hung still, the mats stretched out in their flat institutional order. A Saturday morning before the world arrived. "What did you think was going to happen?" Danny asked. Marcus opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. "I thought 3 of us would be enough to make it different," he said. He heard the words as he said them and felt the particular shame of hearing something honest that you haven't admitted before. "I thought if there were 3 of us, the outcome would change." And it didn't. No. Danny uncrossed his arms. He put his hands on his knees. He looked at the mat between them. "Marcus," he said, "I've been coaching for 19 years. I have had talented fighters, and I have had hard workers, and I have had maybe a handful of people who were genuinely both. You are one of the genuine ones." He paused. "And that man, whatever he was, whatever he is now, he is operating in a category that you do not yet have access to. And the reason you don't have access to it has nothing to do with your technique." Marcus waited. "It has to do with what your technique is for," Danny said. "You have spent 4 years using your skill to establish a position in the room. He spent 22 years using his skill to keep people alive. Those are not the same activity. They do not produce the same person. He stood up. What happened on Friday night could end your career. You understand that. I know. If he files a report, if Curtis or Jonah talks, if anyone saw that truck at his workshop and connects it to you. Danny looked at him directly. Your sponsors pull out. Your students leave. The regional committee doesn't let you compete. Everything you built goes away. I know, Marcus said again. Does that scare you? Marcus considered it honestly. It would have. 2 weeks ago. Danny studied him. What changed? I don't know yet, Marcus said. Something. I'm still figuring out what. What Marcus didn't know was that Ethan was also figuring something out. Not about Marcus. Ethan had a fairly complete picture. Marcus Reed and had arrived at his conclusions about the young fighter with the matter-of-fact efficiency of a man who had spent decades reading people in high-stakes environments. His conclusions were not unflattering. Talent without direction. Pride without proportion. A young man who was actively building the cage he would eventually need to escape. Because nobody in his life had yet loved him enough to tell him the cage was a cage. What Ethan was figuring out was his daughter. Lily had seen things she wasn't supposed to see. Not Friday night. Lily had been at Carol's on Friday, asleep by 9:30, and knew nothing about the workshop. But she had seen Saturday, when she'd come home to find her father at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a quality of quiet that was slightly different from his normal quiet. His normal quiet was ambient. Settled, the background noise of a man at peace. This quiet had a texture. She was 10 years old, and she knew the difference. She sat down across from him with her cereal, and she watched him the way she watched things, not performing observation. Just actually doing it. Something happened, she said. Ethan looked at her. What makes you say that? You're holding your coffee wrong. He looked down at his mug. He was holding it around the body instead of by the handle, which was his stress position grip. He had not noticed. Nothing that matters, he said. Dad, Lily. That's not an answer. He looked at her across the table. She was 10 years old with his eyes and her mother's jaw, and the specific, uncomfortable gift of being able to read him better than most adults could. He had watched her develop this gift over 5 years and felt about it the way he felt about most things that were simultaneously beautiful and inconvenient, with appreciation and a moderate amount of resignation. That man from the gymnasium, he said, which was more than he'd intended to say. He came to the workshop last night. Lily put her spoon down. Are you okay? She said. I'm fine. Did he try to hurt you? He tried, Ethan said. It didn't work. Lily was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved across her father's face with the systematic quality of a person running a diagnostic. No visible injuries. Normal posture. Coffee wrong. But otherwise baseline. What did you do to him? She asked. What I had to. Did you hurt him? Ethan looked at her. No, why not? He set his coffee down, switched his grip to the handle, looked at his daughter. Because he's a young man with real skill who's making bad decisions, because nobody in his life has pointed him in a better direction, Ethan said. Hurting him would just confirm what he already believes, that the world is a place where power gets used on people. It wouldn't teach him anything, except to build more of the same thing. Lily considered this. So, what did you do instead? I let him understand that what he was trying to do wasn't going to work. And then I told him to go home. And he went? He went. She picked her spoon back up, resumed her cereal, chewed, thought. He's going to come back, she said. Not as a prediction, as a statement of pattern recognition. Ethan looked at her. Probably not the same way, he said, but some way. He didn't answer immediately. Why do you think that? He asked. Because he hasn't figured out what he's actually angry about yet, Lily said. With the matter-of-fact certainty of a 10-year-old who has spent considerable time watching adults not understand self. When people are angry at the wrong thing, they keep coming back to the thing they're pointing at because it's easier than figuring out the real thing. Ethan looked at his daughter for a long moment. Where did you get that? He said. You said it, she said. About something else. I was listening. He picked his coffee back up, held it by the handle this time. You're not wrong, he said quietly. The twist came on a Tuesday. from a direction nobody had anticipated, including Marcus. He was at his afternoon class, running his intermediate students through a sequence he'd drilled 500 times. His attention split between the mechanics on the mat and the conversation he'd been having with himself for 4 days. He had made a decision that morning, not about Ethan, not about the career implications, not about Danny's warning. A different decision, quieter and harder and more uncertain than any decision he'd made before. He had decided to understand. Not to accept, not yet. Understanding felt like the prior step, and even that was territory he was moving into without a map. He was thinking about this when his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. He stepped off the mat, looked at it. The message was 5 words. "We need to talk, Phil." He called back immediately. Phil picked up on the second ring. "Something came up," Phil said. "Not about you. About Ethan." Marcus went still. "What about him? He's being investigated." The word landed with the particular weight of words that arrive without preparation and rearrange the furniture of what you were thinking about. "Investigated for what?" Marcus said. "The airfield where he works," Phil said. "His employer is under investigation for maintenance record falsification. The FAA. It's been running for about 6 weeks quietly, and it broke into a more active phase this week." Phil's voice was careful, controlled. "Ethan is not the target. He is, as far as I understand it, from people who would know he's actually the reason the investigation exists. He flagged the discrepancies internally 8 months ago, was told to ignore them, and eventually reported them through external channels. Marcus processed this. He's a whistleblower. He's the whistleblower," Phil said, "which means that as of about 48 hours ago, when the investigation went active, his employer knows what he did, and his employer has, in the last 2 years, demonstrated a willingness to apply pressure to people through channels that are not strictly legal." Marcus stood in the hallway of his gym. One of his students called from inside, asking a question about a grip adjustment. He held up one finger without turning. "What kind of pressure?" he said. "The kind that goes after things people care about," Phil said. "Property, reputation, relationships." A beat of silence. "His daughter," Marcus said. "I don't know that specifically," Phil said. "I know the pattern. And I know Ethan is dealing with it without a lot of support. Because he spent 5 years making himself invisible. And he's good enough at it that most people don't know enough about his situation to know he might need anything." Marcus said nothing. Phil let the silence sit. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus said finally. "Because you keep showing up in this man's life," Phil said. "And you have 2 choices about what that means. You're showing up either as one more thing he has to manage, or as something else." Another pause. "I thought you should know which option is still available." The call ended. Marcus stood in the hallway for 30 seconds. Then he walked back into the gym, ran the rest of his class with complete, answered every question and corrected every error and made sure his students left better than they arrived. He did it with the kind of discipline that doesn't come from not being distracted. It comes from deciding what matters enough to do correctly, regardless of what else is happening. When the last student left, he sat on the mat in the empty gym and thought about Ethan Walker sitting in a kitchen with his 10-year-old daughter, holding a coffee cup wrong. The investigation was real, and it was worse than Phil had described. The airfield Meridian Aviation Services, privately owned, 8 employees had been falsifying maintenance logs on at least 14 aircraft for a period covering 2.5 years. The discrepancies were the kind that sounded technical and were actually terrifying. Pressure checks logged as complete that weren't performed. Component replacement dates recorded months ahead of actual replacement. Fuel system inspections marked certified by mechanics who hadn't been on site the days in question. Ethan had found the first one 11 months ago. A fuel line certification dated 6 weeks before he'd been hired, certified under his employee number, which didn't exist at that date. He had assumed clerical error. He'd flagged it to the operations manager, a man named Gary Howell, who told him it was a database migration glitch and would be corrected. It wasn't corrected. Ethan found the second one 3 weeks later, then the third. By the time he'd found the fifth discrepancy, he understood that it was not an error, and he was not looking at a database problem. He understood what Gary Howell had done. He understood that Howell had been backdating and falsifying maintenance records, partly to pass FAA certification windows, partly to reduce actual maintenance costs, and partly, Ethan had eventually come to suspect, to enable insurance claims on aircraft that were conveniently out of service for procedures that had never been performed. He had reported it, first through a formal internal complaint that disappeared into Howell's administrative layer, then through the FAA's anonymous reporting channel. Then, when the anonymous report produced no visible action in 4 months, through a direct contact he had a man he'd met through a mutual friend who worked in federal aviation oversight. 6 weeks ago, the investigation went active. 4 days ago, Howell found out who had reported him. Ethan had known the moment Howell found out because Howell had called him into the office and sat across from him with the specific quality of a man who is very angry and very scared simultaneously and is managing both by projecting a third thing: calm. "I want you to know," Howell had said, "that whatever misunderstandings might exist about our record-keeping, they're being addressed, and I'd appreciate if any concerns you have come to me directly in the future, rather than elsewhere." Ethan had looked at him. Noted, he'd said. He'd gone back to his work. He'd also called his lawyer that afternoon and begun the documentation process for a potential wrongful termination case. Because he knew what "come to me" directly meant from a man who had just discovered he'd been reported. It meant, "There are consequences coming, and I want you to know I know." The consequences arrived 2 days later, not to Ethan directly, to the youth center. The youth center, where Ethan had been connected through a volunteer relationship, received a letter from a donor who wished to remain anonymous, expressing concerns about the character and background of certain volunteer instructors, specifically referencing an individual with a history of violent confrontations. Attached was a photograph, taken without consent, of the exterior of Ethan's workshop the night Marcus had come with Curtis and Jonah. The director of the youth center called Ethan. Ethan sat on the edge of his workbench with the phone against his ear and listened to a woman named Sandra Ortega, who ran the center with her own money and 20 years of her life, tell him carefully and with genuine regret that she'd received the letter and needed to discuss it with him before any decisions were made. "I don't believe it," Sandra said. "I want to be clear about that. I don't believe it, but I have to ask." "Ask," Ethan said. "Were there men at your workshop 2 weeks ago?" "Late at night?" "Yes." A pause. "Were there physical? Was there an incident?" "Yes." Another pause. "Longer, Ethan." "I didn't invite them," he said. "I tried to give them a way out before anything happened. I have a witness, actually 2 witnesses, because a neighbor called it in, and there's a record of the call who can confirm the sequence of events if necessary." Sandra exhaled slowly. "Someone is trying to use this." "Yes, this is connected to the airfield situation." "I believe so." The line was quiet. "What do you need from me?" Sandra said. Ethan looked at the engine part he'd been working on when the phone rang. A small component, worn but not beyond repair, the kind of thing that needed patience more than it needed force. "Nothing right now," he said. "I just need you to know the truth. What you do with it is your call." Marcus found out about the letter from Phil, who heard it from Sandra Ortega's assistant, who mentioned it to a parent of a student at the center, who happened to be connected to the same network of people that Phil had been connected to for 30 years. He found out on a Wednesday morning. He sat with it until Thursday. On Thursday afternoon, he drove to the airfield. He sat in the parking lot for a long time. He had not told anyone he was coming. He had not made a plan. He had driven there because something had reorganized inside him, and he was following the reorganization rather than the plan. Ethan was at the end of the hangar, working on a small twin-engine aircraft. He saw Marcus come in but didn't stop what he was doing. "Wrong," Marcus said. He stopped about 10 feet away, in the open space of the hangar, hands in his jacket pockets. "What's being done to you is wrong." Ethan looked at him. Yes, the picture they sent. Of my truck. Outside your workshop. They're using that night against you. Yes. That's because of me, Marcus said. His voice didn't flinch from it. What I did that night. My truck there. That's the ammunition they're using. Ethan set down his tool. Turned to face him fully. It was always going to be something. If it wasn't your truck, it would have been something else. People who operate the way Gary Howell operates don't need much. They need an opening. I gave them the opening. You did, Ethan agreed. Yes. Marcus absorbed that. He'd expected Ethan to soften it. The way the man softened everything with that even, measured quality. He hadn't softened it. Marcus had come to respect that. I want to fix it, Marcus said. Ethan looked at him for a long moment. Assessing. Not the way he'd assessed him on the mat, not threat assessment. Something different. How? Ethan said. I'll give a statement, Marcus said, to whoever needs it. The police? The FAA investigation. The youth center. Wherever. I'll state on record that I came to your workshop with 2 other men. That I initiated the confrontation. And that you exercised restraint and attempted to de-escalate before anything physical happened. I'll put my name on it. He paused. It will damage my career. People will ask questions. The regional committee will probably want to talk. He met Ethan's eyes. I don't care. Ethan watched him. You've thought about this, Ethan said. Since Wednesday morning. You understand it doesn't undo the investigation. Howell still has the picture. Your statement corrects the narrative around it, but doesn't remove it. I know, Marcus said. It's the only thing I can actually fix. So, I'll fix it. The hangar was quiet except for the distant sound of a small engine somewhere on the field. Someone running a test on something, the mechanical rhythm of it carrying in from outside. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then, why? Marcus thought about Lily, who had watched him from the edge of the mat. Thought about a 10-year-old girl with her father's eyes who could read a coffee cup grip and understood more about adult psychology than most people twice her age. Thought about a man who had the capability to destroy him twice and had instead, both times, sent him home. Because it's right, Marcus said. And then, because Ethan deserved the honest version, and because I've been wrong about almost everything for the last 2 weeks, and this is the first thing I'm sure about. Ethan nodded slowly. Once. The way he nodded, not performative. Not theatrical. Just receiving information that had been delivered honestly, and acknowledging that it was received. Talk to Danny Reyes first, Ethan said. Your coach. Tell him what you're planning. Don't make this decision without him knowing. Why? Because he's been in your corner, Ethan said. And people who have been in your corner deserve to be told when you're about to step into something that changes the shape of your career. Marcus looked at him. You're coaching me, he said. I'm telling you what I'd want someone to tell me, Ethan said. Same thing. Marcus breathed out. Okay, he said. I'll talk to Danny first. He turned to go. Marcus. He turned back. Ethan was looking at him with that flat, even quality that Marcus had first read as absence and had since learned to read correctly. What you just walked in here and said, Ethan said. That took more than anything that happened on the mat. Marcus stood in the open mouth of the hangar with the afternoon light behind him, and the weight of the last 2 weeks in his chest, and Ethan Walker's quiet certainty in front of him. He didn't know what to say, so he didn't say anything. He nodded, and he walked out. The next 72 hours moved fast. Marcus talked to Danny on Thursday evening. He sat across from his coach in Danny Smallfall at the back of the gym, the room that smelled like old coffee and sports tape, and the decades of decisions that had been made in it, and told him everything. Not a version of everything. The actual account, from the gymnasium on Saturday to the workshop on Friday night to the phone call, from Phil to the parking lot of the airfield that afternoon. Danny listened without interrupting. This was unusual for Danny, who had opinions about most things and was not shy about delivering them in real time. The fact that he listened to the whole thing without speaking told Marcus more about the weight of what he was saying than any response would have. When Marcus finished, Danny was quiet for almost a full minute. You want to file a statement, Danny said. Yes. Knowing what it does to your standing with the committee. Yes. knowing that it hands your sponsors exactly the kind of story that makes them nervous. I know. Danny looked at the desk between them. Looked at Marcus. Looked at the desk again. Why didn't you tell me about the workshop when it happened, he said. Because I was ashamed, Marcus said. Not a prepared answer. Just the true one. Which was the same thing. Danny nodded slowly. And now? Now I'm still ashamed, Marcus said. But I'm less interested in managing how it looks. I'm more interested in doing the right thing with it. Danny was quiet for another moment. Then he reached across the desk and picked up a pen and pulled a notepad toward him. Tell me the name of Ethan's lawyer, he said. Marcus blinked. Why? Because I know someone at the Regional Aviation Press, Danny said. And if Gary Howell is using a photograph of my fighter's truck to intimidate a federal whistleblower, that's a story that some people would be very interested in telling. He looked up from the notepad. You're not the only one who can do something useful here. Marcus stared at him. He had walked into this office expecting consequences. He had prepared for consequences. He had not prepared for his coach to pick up a pen. Danny, he said. Write it down, Danny said. Tapping the notepad. Marcus wrote down the name. The statement went in on Friday. Marcus gave it to the San Diego Police Department, which had an existing report from Ethan's neighbor's call, and supplemented it with a written account. He was clear, specific, and complete. He did not minimize. He named himself as the instigating party. He named Curtis and Jonah. He described the sequence of the confrontation and Ethan's conduct throughout it. He noted that at no point did Ethan escalate beyond what was necessary to stop the threat. He also gave a copy to Sandra Ortega at the youth center. Sandra read it in her office with Marcus sitting across from her. She read the whole thing before saying anything. Then she looked up. You didn't have to do this, she said. I know, Marcus said. It's going to cost you. Probably, he said. Sandra looked back down at the statement. Then she picked up her phone and called the anonymous donor, who turned out, when pressed, to be a front contact for Howell's attorney, and told them the center had received new information, had reviewed it, and that any further communication of this nature would be treated as harassment and referred to the appropriate authorities. She hung up. She looked at Marcus. We have a volunteer slot on Tuesday afternoons, she said. If you're interested. Marcus looked at her. Helping teach a self-defense class, she said. For teenagers. He was quiet for a moment. Is Ethan involved in the program, he said. He was, Sandra said. I expect he will be again. Marcus thought about the mat, about the gymnasium and the workshop, and the hangar and all the spaces in between. All the ground he'd covered in 2 weeks, moving from one version of himself toward whatever came next. Yeah, he said. I'm interested. Sandra nodded. Made a note. The Tuesday afternoon slot would not change Marcus's career overnight. It would not undo the reputation damage or resolve the committee questions or bring back the sponsors, back the bullies who had already started going quiet. Those things would take time and work, and the specific patience that comes from deciding you're rebuilding something on a different foundation than the one that cracked. But it was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays, like most things worth doing, had to start somewhere. The Tuesday that Sandra Ortega had circled on her calendar arrived with a kind of unremarkable normalcy that makes important things feel survivable. Marcus got to the youth center at 2:15. He was early because he was always early to things that mattered. And this mattered in a way he was still figuring out how to describe. He had his gym bag, he had his training clothes, he had the statement he'd given to the police, and to Sandra already filed. Already on record, already doing whatever it was going to do to his career and his standing, and the careful structure he'd built over 4 years. He had stopped checking his phone for sponsor messages. The youth center had 3 rooms and a converted storage space that doubled as a second training area. Sandra had set up the self-defense class in the main room mats on the floor. A rack of practice equipment along one wall, 12 kids aged 13 to 17, sitting in a loose cluster near the back when Marcus walked in. He looked at them. They looked at him. A teenage boy in the front said, "Are you the fighter?" "I'm a fighter," Marcus said. "Yeah, the one who lost to the old guy?" Marcus paused. "Where did you hear that?" Raphael's dad told Raphael, the boy said, with the specific confidence of adolescence, delivering information they know will land. Raphael's in my class. Marcus looked at the kid. Then he put his bag down. Yeah, he said. I lost to the old guy. The room got a little quieter. Does that bother you? Another kid asked a girl. Maybe 15. Watching him with the kind of direct attention that doesn't leave room for performance. Marcus thought about it. It used to, he said. A lot. Now it's the most useful thing that's happened to me in 4 years. That answer produced a silence that was different from the earlier one. The earlier one was testing. This one was listening. He was still standing there, trying to figure out where to start when the door to the training room opened and Ethan Walker walked in. They looked at each other across the room. The 12 teenagers looked at both of them. The boy who had asked about the old guy looked between them with the alert expression of someone whose information has been confirmed in real time. Ethan set his bag down against the wall. He looked at Marcus with the same flat, even quality that Marcus had spent 2 weeks misreading and was now learning to read correctly. It was not absence. It was not indifference. It was the specific composure of a man who had decided, a long time ago, that the most powerful thing he could bring to any room was himself, exactly as he was, without addition. You're early, Ethan said. You're also early, Marcus said. I'm always early. Me too, a beat. Okay, Ethan said. He looked at the 12 kids. Let's get started. What followed was not what Marcus had expected, and he would later find it difficult to explain exactly what he had expected. Some version of a structured class, probably. A curriculum. Techniques in sequence. The normal architecture of instruction that he had delivered himself 5 days a week for 3 years. Ethan sat down on the mat, cross-legged, like he was settling in for a conversation. He said to the kids. They sat down. Marcus, after a moment, sat down too. What is self-defense? Ethan asked. A kid said. Knowing how to fight. No, Ethan said, not harshly. Just directly. Another kid. Protecting yourself. Getting closer, Ethan said. What else? Silence. Knowing when not to fight, a girl in the back said. She said it quietly, like she wasn't sure it was the right answer. Ethan looked at her. What's your name? Destiny. Destiny's right, Ethan said. Self-defense starts before anyone throws a punch. It starts when you understand that a fight you avoid is a fight you won. Every single time. He looked around at them. I've been in more dangerous situations than most people will ever see. And the ones I'm most proud of are the ones where nothing happened. Because I saw it coming, and I moved before it arrived. The room was quiet. Marcus sat on the mat and listened and felt something in his chest settle into a position it had been searching for. Gary Howell made his second move on a Wednesday, 9 days after Marcus filed his statement. Ethan was at the airfield when it happened. He was inside a Cessna's maintenance bay, elbow deep in a fuel system check, when his phone rang. He saw the name Sandra Ortega and climbed out to answer it. He's filing a counter-complaint, Sandra said, against you, claiming that you created a hostile work environment and that your external report to the FAA was retaliatory, connected to a dispute over your work hours and a performance review. Ethan was quiet. Can he make that stick? Sandra asked. No, Ethan said. I documented everything, every discrepancy, every date, every internal report I filed before going external. My lawyer has all of it. He leaned against the side of the aircraft. He's not trying to make it stick. He's trying to make noise. Noise is its own problem. It takes time and attention to deal with. And while you're dealing with it, you're not dealing with other things. Like the FAA investigation. Ethan agreed. What do you need? Sandra said. Give me 24 hours, Ethan said. He called his lawyer. He called Tarrant. He called the FAA contact, who had been the recipient of his original report, and who, by this point, had become something closer to an ally than a channel. He spent 4 hours on the phone, moving methodically through the response plan he'd built in the back of his mind for exactly this scenario. Because men who have spent decades in environments where the situation can deteriorate without Develop the habit of building response plans for scenarios they hope never arrive. By 7 in the evening, he had what he needed. The counter-complaint would go nowhere. The documentation was airtight. His lawyer had already been in contact with the FAA investigator, who confirmed that the retaliatory report angle was a known tactic and would be addressed in the exchange's findings. What Howell had actually done, by filing the counter-complaint, was create a paper trail that connected him to awareness of the investigation at a specific time, information that the FAA investigator had noted with what Ethan's lawyer described as considerable professional interest. Ethan drove home. He made dinner. Lily told him about a history project she was working on, something about the space race, which she had opinions about. He listened to all of them. He cleaned up. He helped her with the research for 45 minutes. When she went to bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a glass of water and thought about Gary Howell sitting in his office, having just made his situation measurably worse while believing he'd made it better. He thought about the specific, predictable behavior of people who are cornered and are too proud or too frightened to consider that stopping might be the better option. He had known men like Howell in different contexts, in different uniforms, behind different motivations. The mechanism was always the same. Escalation in place of adaptation. More of what wasn't working. Harder, faster, as though the problem was volume rather than direction. He went to bed. He did not hold his coffee cup wrong. The thing that nobody had accounted for was Jonah Park. Jonah was the Marcus had described as quick and aggressive. The one with the chip on his shoulder and the energy that ran on something older than martial arts. The one who, in the workshop on Friday night, had asked a genuine question. So why didn't you just say that? And received a genuine answer. And had been sitting with that answer ever since. He called Marcus on a Thursday morning. I need to ask you something, Jonah said. Without preamble. Go ahead, Marcus said. The guy, Walker, is he doing the thing at the youth center? He is. Tuesdays, silence. Would he? Jonah started. Stopped. Is there room for another volunteer? Marcus was quiet for a moment. He was in his car, parked outside his gym, about to start his morning session. He looked at the windshield without seeing it. Why do you want to volunteer? Marcus said. Because I've been doing the wrong thing for a long time, Jonah said. And I need to do a different thing. And I don't know how to find a different thing on my own. His voice was flat and honest, in the way voices get when people have stopped managing them. You said he told you that skill doesn't need an audience. I keep thinking about that. I want to know if it's actually true or if it's just something guys like him say. It's true, Marcus said. I can tell you it's true. But you should find out yourself. So there's room. I'll ask, Marcus said. He asked Ethan that afternoon. They were at the center early. The way they both were every Tuesday, sitting in Sandra's office with bad coffee, while she went over the week's administrative issues. Jonah Park wants to volunteer, Marcus said. Ethan looked at him. Why? Ethan said. He said he's been doing the wrong thing, and he wants to do a different thing. Ethan held his coffee, held the silence. That's an honest reason, he said finally. I thought so too. Tell him to come in next Tuesday. Ethan looked at Sandra. Is that okay? The more coverage we have, the more kids we can take on, Sandra said. We have a waiting list. Ethan nodded, looked back at his coffee. One condition, he said. Marcus waited. He teaches, not assists. He takes a group of 4 kids and he runs them through the opening sequence himself. First session. Ethan looked at Marcus. People learn by doing. People who've been doing the wrong thing especially. Put them in a position of responsibility immediately. It changes the relationship with the material. Marcus relayed this to Jonah. Jonah said, he wants me to teach on the first day? 4 kids, opening sequence. A pause. That's terrifying. Yeah. Marcus said. Another pause. Okay, Jonah said. The FAA investigation reached its formal preliminary findings on a Friday afternoon that arrived with none of the ceremony that the preceding weeks might have warranted. Ethan got a call from his lawyer at 4:17. The preliminary findings support your original report in full, the lawyer said. His name was Russ Caldera, and he had a voice like poured concrete, heavy, even, and reliable. 14 aircraft, 26 months of falsified records. Howell is looking at federal charges. The investigation is recommending the airfield be grounded pending full review, Ethan said. The other employees. The 7 who weren't involved are being notified separately. Their records are clean. The FAA is distinguishing between Howell's conduct and the general workforce. Russ paused. They'll likely be able to continue working with another operator while the facility is under review. And my position? Your position is that of a cooperating witness with full documentation who reported through appropriate channels after an internal complaint was suppressed, Russ said. There is no adverse finding against you. There is, actually, a commendation in the preliminary language, not formal, not public, but it's there. I've seen this language before. It means people know what you did and why you did it. Ethan sat with that for a moment. What about Howell's counter-complaint? Dismissed as retaliatory. It's noted in the findings as an attempt to obstruct cooperation with the investigation. That notation, Russ said, is not going to help Gary Howell's sentencing conversation. After he hung up, Ethan stayed where he was. He was in the workshop, the same workshop where Marcus had come on a Friday night with Curtis and Jonah, and a plan that hadn't survived contact with the reality it met. The workshop smelled the same. The engine part he'd been working on that night was still on the bench. He'd finished it the following week, cataloged it, set it aside for the aircraft it belonged to. He thought about the sequence. 11 months ago, he'd found a fuel line certification that didn't add up. He'd flagged it to a man who told him to ignore it. He hadn't ignored it. He'd kept pulling the thread, kept documenting, kept going through channels that didn't respond, and then through channels that did. He'd absorbed the counter-complaint and the photograph and the pressure on the youth center and the implicit threat that sat behind Howell's carefully controlled office conversation. He'd absorbed all of it without moving from the position he'd decided to occupy. He thought about a 24-year-old version of himself standing in front of a commanding officer after making a call that was wrong. He thought about the man who had let him understand that privately instead of publicly. He thought about what that cost the man and what it gave Ethan, not just the specific mercy of that moment, but the model, the demonstration that capability and restraint existed in the same body, that they were not in competition with each other, that the strongest possible expression of what you were capable of was sometimes the decision not to use most of it. He sat in his workshop until the light outside changed. Then he called Lily. "Hey," she said. She was at Carol's doing homework. "Hey kid, you okay?" "Yeah," he said. "I'm okay." A pause. "Did something happen?" she asked. "The good kind," he said. She was quiet for a moment. He could hear her thinking, the specific quality of Lily's thinking, which had a texture to it even over the phone. "Can we do the good tacos?" she said. He smiled. "Yeah," he said. "I'll pick you up in 20. Marcus found out about the FAA findings from Phil Granger, which was how Marcus had been finding out most things for the past 3 weeks, and which he had stopped being embarrassed about. He called Ethan. Ethan picked up on the third ring. He was driving. Marcus could hear the low sound of the road. "I heard about the investigation," Marcus said. "Good news travels." "Yeah." A pause. "Congratulations." "Thank you," Ethan said, "for the statement. It helped with the youth center situation. It was what I could do. It was the right thing to do," Ethan said. "Those are usually the same, but not always. When they are, it's worth noting." Marcus sat on the floor of his empty gym. He'd sent his last student home 20 minutes ago and hadn't turned off the lights yet. He liked the gym at this hour, the equipment settled, the work of the day completed, the space held by what it had been used for. "I lost 2 sponsors this week," Marcus said. "I know," Ethan said. "Danny told me." Marcus paused. "Danny talks to you?" "Danny and I have been talking for about a week and a half," Ethan said. He reached out after he contacted his press friend. He wanted to make sure the coordination was useful, rather than creating more noise. Marcus absorbed this. His coach and the man he'd tried to intimidate at a workshop at 10 at night, coordinating. The image required a moment. Are you annoyed? Ethan asked. No, Marcus said, meaning it. No. I'm no. The sponsors who left were going to leave eventually, Ethan said. The ones who stay after something like this are the ones worth having. Did you lose things? Marcus asked. Over the years. Things you built. A brief silence. The road sound continuing. Yes, Ethan said. How did you handle it? Some of it well, Ethan said. Some of it badly. I had a commanding officer who once told me that the measure of a man isn't what he loses. It's what he builds back and what he builds it for. A pause. I think about that when the ground shifts. Marcus looked at the medals on the wall of his gym, the perfect shelf, the level he'd used to get it exactly right. Marcus, Ethan said. Yeah. The regional committee called Danny. They want a meeting. Marcus had been expecting this. Had been expecting it since the day he filed the statement and knew what it would surface. He had told himself he was ready. Sitting on the floor of his gym, he found out he was almost ready. Close enough. When? Thursday, Ethan said. Danny wants you to prepare a written account. Everything. The gymnasium. The workshop. The statement. The reasoning. All of it. That could end my competitive career. Yes, Ethan said. It could. Marcus waited for more. There wasn't more. You're not going to tell me it'll be fine, Marcus said. I don't know if it'll be fine, Ethan said. I know that doing the right thing and having it cost something is not the same as having been wrong to do it. The road sound. The empty gym. Marcus and Ethan Walker, who had started in a gymnasium 3 weeks ago on opposite sides of something that neither of them had chosen. Sitting in their respective silences on opposite ends of a phone call. Having arrived somewhere that neither of them had planned. Okay, Marcus said. Okay, Ethan said. They hung up. The committee meeting was held on a Thursday at the regional office, a plain room 6, who had been governing amateur and semi-professional competition in the San Diego area for a combined total of 41 years. They were not unreasonable people. They were, as institutions tend to be, cautious. And caution, when confronted with a statement that implicated one of their most successful fighters in a confrontation that involved 3-to-1 odds at 10 at night, looked a lot like concern. Marcus sat across the table from them with Danny on his left and the written account in a folder in front of him that he had written and rewritten 4 times until it was simply the truth in the most honest language he had available. The committee chair, a woman named Helen Castillo, who had been running regional competitions since Marcus was in middle school, looked at the folder. Then at Marcus, then at the folder again. Walk us through it, she said. Marcus walked them through it. He was in the room for 1 hour and 40 minutes. He answered every question. He did not minimize, and he did not qualify, and he did not offer the versions of the story that made him look better at the expense of accuracy. When Helen asked him why he'd gone to the workshop, he said what he'd said to Danny, because he believed 3-to-1 would change the outcome. When she asked him what changed, he spent 4 minutes answering, and the room got very quiet while he talked. When he was done, Helen looked at the other 5 members. Some kind of silent communication moved around the table that Marcus couldn't fully read. Then she looked at him. You're aware, she said, that we have the option to suspend your competitive standing pending further review. Yes, Marcus said. And you came here anyway. With a full account. Yes. Helen looked at the folder. Mr. Walker, Ethan Hayes, has he submitted anything to this committee? Danny spoke. He submitted a letter this morning. I have a copy if the committee would like to see it. A copy was produced. Helen read it. Passed it. It moved around the table. Marcus had not read the letter. He had not known it existed until this moment. See, very still, while the committee read something Ethan had written about him. In a room where his career was being weighed, and felt the specific vulnerability of a man who has decided to trust something he cannot control. Helen set the letter down. Mr. Walker writes, she said, that in his assessment, the confrontation at his workshop was initiated by you, and resolved through his own restraint, and that your subsequent actions, the statement to law enforcement, the support for the youth center, the voluntary disclosure to this committee represent a substantive change in conduct and judgment. She looked at Marcus over the top of the letter. He states that he considers the matter closed and requests that this committee weigh your self-initiated accountability as the primary factor in its deliberations. The room was quiet. Marcus looked at the middle distance, at the far wall, at nothing specific. He thought about a man who had every reason to let the consequences land, who had been photographed, pressured, had his connection to a youth center threatened, had a federal countercomplaint filed against him, all because of a chain of events that started with Marcus Reed pointing at him in a gymnasium and calling him out in front of 200 people. And that man had written a letter for him, requesting specifically that his accountability be treated as the primary factor. Marcus felt something break open in his chest that was not painful, or not only painful. Helen said, "Mr. Reed, we're going to take a 15-minute recess." Marcus nodded. He and Danny moved to the hallway. Danny got water from a machine against the wall, handed Marcus a bottle. They stood without talking for most of the 15 minutes. "He wrote a letter," Marcus said. "He did," Dancy said. "You knew." "I knew he was planning to. I didn't know what it said until just now." Marcus turned the water bottle in his hands. "He didn't tell me." "No," Danny said, "he wouldn't." "Why not?" Danny looked at him with the expression of a coach delivering something that is going to matter and deserves to be delivered without packaging. "Because if you'd known he was writing it," Danny said, "you'd have walked into that room leaning on it. And he wanted you to walk in on your own." Marcus stood in the hallway of the regional committee office, holding a water bottle, with his career in a room behind a closed door. He understood. The committee came back in 11 minutes. Not 15. Helen sat down. The others arranged themselves. She looked at Marcus across the table with the specific quality of someone who has made a decision and is now going to deliver it without softening and without hardening. "The committee has decided not to suspend your competitive standing," she said. "We are placing a formal notation in your record, the account you provided today, unmodified, which will remain part of your professional documentation. Any future conduct of a similar nature will result in immediate suspension." She paused. "We are also recommending, not requiring, that you continue your current volunteer work. We consider it relevant that you are already doing so without being asked." Danny said, "Thank you." Marcus said nothing for a moment. "Thank you," he said. Helen looked at him. Not warmly, exactly, more like the way experienced people look at younger ones, and who have passed through something, and come out a different shape on the other side. With acknowledgement, with a kind of measured respect. "Your account was honest," she said. "Honest accounts are rarer than they should be in rooms like this. We noticed." Marcus drove home without music. He sat in his apartment without turning on the television. He called Phil Granger. Who was the person who seemed to anchor this whole rotating constellation of events? "How'd it go?" Phil said. "They kept my standing," Marcus said. "Notation on the record. Could have been worse. Could have been a lot worse." Marcus paused. "Phil, Ethan wrote them a letter." "I know," Phil said. "Did you tell him to?" Phil was quiet for a moment. "I mentioned that the committee would benefit from hearing from him. What he did with that was his own decision." "Why did you mention it?" Another pause. "Longer. Because I've known Ethan Hayes for 20 years, Phil said. "I served alongside him for 2 of those years. And I've watched him from a distance for the rest. And in 20 years, I have never seen him write off a person who showed genuine willingness to change. His voice was matter-of-fact in the way of a man who has seen enough to be sure. You showed willingness. He was never going to let that go unacknowledged." Marcus absorbed that. "What do I owe him?" Marcus said. "You don't owe him anything," Phil said. "That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Phil was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that precedes something that is going to be said, simply because it is the most accurate thing available. "It's what strong people do with other people," Phil said, "when they have the choice." 2 Tuesdays later, Jonah Park arrived at the youth center at 2 in the afternoon, with the energy of a man about to do something genuinely terrifying. Marcus was already there. He watched Jonah walk in and read everything in the set of his shoulders, the tension, the resolve underneath the tension, the specific quality of someone who has decided to do a difficult thing and is now in the execution phase with no room to back out. 4 kids, Jonah said. 4 kids, Marcus confirmed. Opening sequence. Ethan will be in the room, but he'll be with the other group. Jonah looked at the mat, at the 4 teenagers who would be his group, 2 boys. 2 girls, ranging from 14 to 16, watching him with the kind of frank assessment that teenagers bring to everything. What if I do it wrong? Jonah said quietly. Not to Marcus, mostly to himself. Ethan was passing behind him. Moving toward his group on the far side, he paused. Correct it, Ethan said, without stopping. That's what the next repetition is for. Jonah looked at Marcus. Marcus shrugged. It's what he does. Jonah turned back to his 4 kids. Okay, he said. My name is Jonah. We're going to start from the beginning. One of the girls, a 16-year-old named Taylor, who had already demonstrated in previous sessions that she had opinions about everything, looked at him and said, Have you done this before? Taught? I mean, no, Jonah said. Have you been doing martial arts for long? Long enough. Taylor looked at him with the unflinching assessment of someone who has excellent radar and is currently running it. Did you lose to the old guy too? She asked. Jonah blinked, looked at Marcus across the room. Marcus was looking somewhere else with the specific attentiveness of a man who is absolutely not listening. Jonah looked back at Taylor. Yeah, he said. I did. Taylor nodded slowly. Considered this. Okay, she said. I'll try your class. Jonah almost laughed. The tension in his shoulders moved a fraction. He sat down on the mat, cross-legged, the way Ethan had started on the very first day. The 4 kids sat down in front of him. What is self-defense, he said. Taylor said. Immediately, knowing when not to fight. Jonah looked at her. Right, he said. How did you weak one, she said. That's what the old guy asked first, and that was the right answer. Jonah looked across the room at Ethan, who was running his group through a balance exercise. His back mostly turned, apparently entirely occupied. His name is Ethan, Jonah said. He's 45. He doesn't look 45, Taylor said. He really doesn't, Jonah agreed. He got his class started, and across the room, Ethan Walker ran his drills and offered corrections, and asked questions that made teenagers think harder than they wanted to. And the Tuesday afternoon moved, at the pace of useful things, not fast. Not slow, but forward. What happened at the airfield in the weeks that followed was the kind of resolution that doesn't feel like resolution while it's happening, because it happens too incrementally to announce itself. Gary Howell was formally charged on a Thursday morning. 3 counts of falsifying federal aviation records, 2 counts related to insurance fraud, and 1 count of attempting to obstruct a federal investigation, the last one stemming from the counter-complaint that Russ Caldera had flagged. The paper trail that Howell had created by trying to apply pressure through a process he didn't fully understand. Ethan was not in the courtroom. He was at the airfield, which was operating under temporary management while the FAA review was completed, helping a pilot named Mrs. Kowalski, no relation to Dave Kowalski, from the gymnasium, assess the condition of a Beechcraft Bonanza that had been in the affected operations records and needed a clean certification before she could fly it again. Mrs. Kowalski was 71 years old and had been flying for 44 years and had the specific quality of excellent pilots, a combination of deep competence and zero tolerance for anything that compromised it. She had been furious about the record falsification in a way that was precise and unsentimental, not because it had put her at risk personally, but because it had inserted a variable into an environment that was supposed to be controlled. She had told Ethan this. He had agreed with every word. He ran through the Beechcraft's fuel systems with the same attention he brought to everything. He documented each finding. He certified what was certifiable and flagged what wasn't. When he was done, he stood at the tail of the aircraft and looked at his paperwork. Complete, accurate, traceable. He thought about 11 months ago, finding the first discrepancy. The specific sensation of seeing something wrong in a system that was supposed to be reliable, not alarm, not panic, just the flat, clear recognition that the thing in front of him was not what it was supposed to be, and the equally flat, clear understanding that this information required action. He had taken the action. He had kept taking it through every layer of resistance. And here was the aircraft, documented correctly, safe to fly. Mrs. Kowalski leaned out of the cockpit. "All clear?" "Clear," Ethan said. She started the engine. He stepped back, watched the Beechcraft taxi toward the runway, with the clean confidence of a well-maintained aircraft operated by a competent pilot. That was what it came down to. Not the drama, not the confrontation, not the statement, and the committee and the letter he'd written in the quiet of his kitchen after Lily was asleep. Those things were the cost of doing the work correctly. The work itself was simpler and harder and better than any of it. An aircraft that was safe to fly. Kids who learned that the fight they walked away from was the one they'd won. A young fighter who had come into a room with the wrong intentions and walked out with a different question. A Tuesday afternoon. Lily, asking if they could get the good tacos. He walked back toward the hangar. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A message from Marcus. Committee approved the full volunteer schedule. Sandra says she wants to expand the Tuesday program to a second day. Thinking Thursday. You good with Thursday? Ethan read it. Looked at the runway where the Beechcraft was completing its takeoff roll. Watched it lift cleanly into the afternoon air. He typed back. Thursday works. He put his phone in his pocket. He went back to work. Thursday arrived the way good things do when you've stopped demanding them quietly. Without announcement, as if it had simply been waiting for the right conditions. Ethan pulled into the youth center parking lot at 1:58. Marcus was already there. Sitting on the hood of his car, drinking from a water bottle and looking at his phone with the particular focus of a man, reading something he wasn't sure how to feel about. Jonah was beside him. Back against the car, arms crossed, eyes on the middle distance. Ethan got out, walked over. Marcus held up his phone. The screen showed a sports news aggregate. A small article. Maybe 4 paragraphs, under the regional martial arts section. The headline read, Reed steps back, from competition circuit cites personal development. The article was factual and brief and quoted Danny Reyes, saying that Marcus was pursuing a period of reflection and community work and would return to competition on his own schedule. When did this go up? Ethan said. This morning, Marcus said. Danny handled the language. I approved it last night. Ethan read it again, then handed the phone back. How does it feel? He said. Marcus thought about it honestly. Like taking off something heavy, he said. I didn't know that was heavy until I put it down. Ethan nodded. He started toward the center door. Ethan, Marcus said. He turned. I lost 3 more sponsors this week, Marcus said. 2 reached out after the article. The other one, the equipment company, they sent a letter saying they were reevaluating their partnership criteria. He paused. I'm telling you because I wanted you to know I'm not backing out. Not because of that. I know you're not, Ethan said. How do you know? Because you're here, Ethan said. At 1:58 on a Thursday, he went inside. Marcus looked at Jonah. Jonah said, He does that. What? Ends conversations at the right moment, Jonah said. Before you start repeating yourself, Marcus got off the hood of the car. Yeah, he said. He does. The Thursday program was smaller than Tuesday by design 8 kids instead of 12. Skewing younger, 11 to 14. Sandra had identified this group specifically as the ones who needed the work most and were least likely to access it through conventional channels. 3 of them had disciplinary records at their schools. 1 had been referred by a social worker. 2 were siblings whose father had recently been incarcerated. Ethan had reviewed the referrals without comment. He'd asked Sandra one question. Are their guardians supportive of them being here? Sandra said yes for all 8. He said, Thursday works. What he did not tell Sandra, and did not tell Marcus or Jonah, was that he had spent 2 evenings rethinking the curriculum approach for this group. The Tuesday kids were a different demographic, more stable home situations. More voluntary enrollment, more baseline trust of adults in authority positions. This Thursday group had reasons not to trust adults who showed up claiming to want to help. He had known people like that, not children. Exactly. But people who had arrived in difficult situations with the same defensive architecture that difficult childhoods produce. He knew how to read it, and he knew what happened if you pushed too fast against it. You lost them before you started. So on the first Thursday, Ethan did something that surprised Marcus and Jonah both. He didn't start with the mat. He sat the 8 kids in a circle and he said, "Tell me something that scares you. Not a big dramatic thing. Something real and small that you don't usually say out loud." The room got the specific quality of silence that comes when people are deciding whether they're safe. One of the siblings, a boy named Darius, 12 years old, with his arms folded tight across his chest and his chin up in the universal posture of someone who has learned that displaying vulnerability produces consequences, said, "Why? Because this class isn't about fighting," Ethan said. "It's about fear, understanding it, using it, and you can't do that until you know what yours are." Darius looked at him. "What are you scared of?" Darius said. It was a deflection and a test simultaneously. The specific maneuver of a kid who has learned that the best defense is making the other person answer first. Ethan said, "Failing my daughter. Specifically not being the father she needs on a day when she really needs it. That one keeps me up sometimes." Darius stared at him. Nobody else in the circle moved. "Your turn," Ethan said. And Darius, after a long moment that cost him something, said, "That my sister's going to be like my dad." The room breathed, his sister 10-year-old Amara, sitting next to him with the same folded arms and elephant chin turned, and looked at him with an expression that moved through several things before settling on something that wasn't anger. "I'm not," she said. "I know," Darius said. "I'm still scared of it." Ethan let that sit where it landed. Then he said, to the whole group, "That's the most honest thing anyone said in this room in a while." And that kind of honesty is the first skill. Marcus was standing at the edge of the mat. He had intended to run a warmth sequence while Ethan opened. He hadn't moved in 6 minutes. He stood there and watched Ethan Walker sit in a circle of 8 kids who didn't trust adults and draw truth out of them, the way a careful hand draws something from deep water, not grabbing, not forcing, just present and patient, and absolutely certain of what he was doing. He thought about a gymnasium 3 months ago, about pointing at a man he'd decided was harmless. The distance between what he'd seen then and what he was watching now felt like geography. The twist came from a direction that nobody had been watching. It came from Dave Kowalski. Dave Kowalski, the man from the gymnasium, the informal expert. The one who had predicted the match would be rough to watch and been spectacularly wrong about who it would be rough for, had been carrying that Saturday around with him for 3 months. He had the video that he'd never managed to press record on. He had the image of Ethan putting Marcus on the mat. He had the memory of the gymnasium, going very quiet and staying that way, and the feeling that he had witnessed something whose meaning he hadn't yet caught up to. He had also, in the intervening months, heard things. The kind of things that travel in communities, the size of theirs, about the workshop, about the investigation, about the youth SARE program, about Marcus Reed filing a statement and showing up on Tuesdays and Thursdays with the energy of a man rebuilding something from a different set of materials. He had a son, 13 years old. His name was Robbie. And Robbie had been having what Dave described to his wife's wife as a hard year, the kind that doesn't make the news and doesn't produce a referral from a social worker, but is real and present, and wearing on the kid in ways Dave could see and didn't fully know how to reach. He drove to the youth center on a Thursday, not to enroll Robbie, not yet, just to look, just to understand what kind of place it was before asking his son to try it. He stood in the doorway of the main room. He watched Ethan Walker run a 12-year-old boy named Darius through a basic balance exercise, standing on one foot, arms out, eyes closed, while talking to him quietly about the relationship between physical balance and decision-making. He watched Marcus Reed, on the other side of the room, running 4 kids through a footwork pattern with the concentrated patience of someone who has discovered that teaching is harder and better than competing. He watched Jonah Park sit on the mat next to a girl who had stopped mid-drill and gone quiet in the specific way that meant something was wrong, and talk to her in a voice too low to hear from the doorway. Just the tone of it, careful, level, unhurried. Dave stood there for about 4 minutes. Then he went home and told his wife that he'd found the thing. He called the youth center the following morning. Sandra answered. He said his name and said he was interested in enrolling his son in the Thursday program. Sandra said she'd put him on the list. Then she said, Mr. Kowalski, were you at the gymnasium event in March? The community martial arts day? He paused. Yeah. How did you? Ethan mentioned you once, Sandra said. Not by name. He described someone who had sat in the stands and witnessed something important without being able to press record. A pause. He said. He hoped that person found a way to do something with what they'd seen. Dave stood in his kitchen holding the phone. He said that, Dave said. He did, Sandra said. Dave looked out his kitchen window at nothing specific. Put Robbie on the list, he said. The regional committee had asked Marcus to submit a progress report 60 days after their meeting. It was a standard condition, a check-in. Not a threat, but weighted with the particular significance of things that determined continued standing. Marcus wrote it on a Sunday night. He sat at his kitchen table with a notepad and a pen, not a computer. Not because he was precious about analog process, but because he thought better with something physical in his hand. Something he'd learned from watching Ethan use tools. He wrote the whole report by hand and typed it afterward. He wrote about Tuesday. He wrote about Thursday. He wrote about Darius and Amara and Taylor and Robbie Kowalski, who had started 2 weeks ago as the quietest kid in the room and had, by his second session, asked more questions than anyone else. Good questions. The kind that came from actually listening rather than waiting to talk. He wrote about Jonah, who had terrified himself by teaching 4 kids on his first day and had arrived the following week asking whether he could take on 6. He wrote about Ethan. Not effusively. He was not a man who wrote effusively. And the committee was not a body that received effusion well. But he wrote honestly. He wrote that he had spent 4 years measuring his capability against other people and discovering, in the space of 3 months, that capability measured against other people was the smallest version of it. He wrote that he understood now the difference between skill used to establish position and skill used to produce something. He wrote that the second one was harder and less immediately rewarding and more worth doing. He wrote, I am a better teacher than I was 3 months ago, and a better teacher than I am a fighter. And I have not decided whether that is a permanent reordering or a temporary one. And I think it might take another year to know. He submitted it electronically on a Monday morning. Helen Castillo called him that afternoon. I read your report, she said. I figured you might. It's honest, she said. I've been working on that, Marcus said. A pause. We received a letter as well, Helen said. Submitted the same morning as your report. Marcus went still. From who? He said. From Sandra Ortega, Helen said. Describing the Thursday and Tuesday programs. Describing the kids. Describing your involvement and Mr. Park's involvement. She paused. And Ethan Hayes' involvement. Marcus said nothing. She included a written statement from one of the students, Helen said. A 12-year-old named Darius. He wrote it by hand. 3 paragraphs, it's... She stopped. Restarted. In 19 years of committee work, I have never read a statement from a 12-year-old that made me want to change what I do with my Thursdays. Marcus sat very still. Helen, he said. The committee is lifting the formal review period, she said. Your record stands as submitted. No further conditions. A pause. We are also, for the first time in this committee's history, formally endorsing a community program. I'll be sending Sandra the paperwork. After the call, Marcus sat without moving for a while. Then he called Ethan. Ethan picked up on the second ring. Marcus told him about Helen's call, about Darius's letter, about the committee endorsement. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Did you know Sandra was writing to them? Marcus asked. No, Ethan said. Did you know about Darius's letter? No, Ethan said. Marcus believed at him. How does it feel? Marcus said. Returning Ethan's question from the parking lot. Ethan was quiet long enough that Marcus thought the connection had dropped. Then, like something is going the right direction. That's all? Marcus said. That's everything, Ethan said. It was Lily who asked the question that mattered. She asked it on a Saturday in June, 3.5 months after the gymnasium. They were at the kitchen table, the same one where Ethan had held his coffee wrong, and she had noticed. The same table where they had eaten breakfast together every morning for 5 years, and where most of the important conversations in both their lives had happened without announcement or preparation. She was working on a school project. Something about community leaders. She was supposed to interview someone who had made a positive impact in their community. And she had chosen, with the pragmatic efficiency of a 10-year-old who lives with the most convenient subject, to interview her father. She had a list of questions on a piece of notebook paper. She was taking this seriously. She had a pencil. She was ready. "Okay," she said. "First question." Ethan looked at her over his coffee, which he was holding by the handle. "Go ahead," he said. "What does it mean to be strong?" He looked at his daughter, at the notebook paper, at the pencil poised above it. "That's your first question," he said. "It's an important one," she said. He thought about it. He did not perform thought. He actually thought about it. The way he thought about questions that deserved real answers. "It means being able to do something and choosing not to, he said. "Not because you're afraid of what happens if you do, because you understand what happens if you don't." Lily wrote it down. Her handwriting was serious and slightly too large for the lines, the way it had been since she started writing. "Second question," she said. "What's the hardest thing you've ever done?" He looked at her. "Raising you alone," he said. "And also the best thing." She looked up from her notebook, studied him with those eyes that saw things. "That's one answer for two things," she said. "Yeah," he said. "Some things are like that." She wrote it down. "Third question," she said. "What do you want people to remember about you?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, the San Diego morning was doing what San Diego mornings did, holding steady. Warm and bright, with the kind of reliability that makes people forget it's unusual. He had lived here for 5 years. He had chosen it because the light was good and the school was good, and it was far enough from the places his former life had happened that he could build something new without the old geography pulling at it. He had built something new. It was sitting across the table from him, with a pencil and a piece of notebook paper, asking the right questions. "That I showed up," he said. "That's all. Whatever I was, whatever I could do, I showed up." Lily wrote it down. She capped her pencil. She looked at her paper. Then she looked at him. "Dad," she said. "Yeah." "Marcus is going to be good," she said. "At the teaching thing. I can tell." Ethan looked at her. "You've only seen him twice." "I know," she said. "I can still tell." He picked up his coffee. "You're probably right," he said. The final regional competition of the season happened on a Saturday in July. In the same gymnasium where it had started. The same floor, the same lighting, the same industrial fans, the water stain in the northeast corner that someone had stopped caring about. Marcus was not competing. He was in the stands. He sat in the third row, the same row where Ethan had been sitting, with his paper cup of bad coffee and his complete stillness. On the morning that started everything, Marcus sat in the same approximate spot with deliberate intention, because he was a man who understood symbolic acts and thought they deserved to be performed consciously rather than accidentally. He watched the morning's matches with genuine attention. He noticed things he hadn't noticed 3 months ago, not about technique, which he had always watched well, but about the fighters, the ones who were performing for the room versus the ones who were actually competing, the ones whose skill was load-bearing versus the ones who were carrying it like a trophy. The difference was visible once you knew how to see it. He was still learning how to see it, but he was further along than he'd been. Ethan arrived at 11 with Lily. They sat 2 seats down from Marcus. Lily leaned across the empty seat between them and said, "You're sitting in my dad's spot, I know," Marcus said. She considered this. "Is that on purpose?" "Yes." She looked at him with the diagnostic eyes. "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied, and settled back to watch the mat. The 3 of them sat through the morning session. Ethan and Marcus didn't talk much, they didn't need to, which was its own kind of arrival. watched the fighters, and made occasional observations. Lily asked technical questions that were more sophisticated than most adults in the room would have asked, and Ethan answered them without condescension, and Marcus added things when he had something useful to add and was quiet when he didn't. At one point, a father too rose up, leaned toward his son, and said, pointing at the mat, "See that? That's a fighter." The gesture was toward a young man who had just won a match with a flashy technique and was playing to the crowd, arms out, feeding on the reaction. Marcus looked at Ethan. Ethan was watching the mat with the same expression he always had, flat, even, seeing everything and showing nothing. "What do you see?" Marcus asked quietly. Ethan watched the young fighter take another bow to the crowd. "Someone who hasn't lost yet," Ethan said, "in the way that teaches you something." Marcus looked at the fighter, at the crowd feeding him, at the performance of it. "What will it take?" Marcus said. "Could be anything," Ethan said. "The right loss, the right person, the right moment when the room isn't watching and he has to figure out what he actually is without the audience." He paused. "Or nothing. Some people don't get there. They just get louder." Marcus sat with that. "You think I would have gotten there," he said, "without the gymnasium?" Ethan looked at him. "I think you were already trying to get there," Ethan said. "I think you were asking the question in the worst way available to you. But you were asking it." Marcus looked at the mat. "The worst way available," he said. "The one that pointed at a stranger and called him out in front of 200 people," Ethan said. "Yeah." Marcus almost laughed. "Not quite. The ghost of it." "In my defense," he said. "There isn't one," Ethan said. "But that's fine, you don't need one anymore." Jonah got there at noon. Coming from a morning shift at his other job, still in his work clothes, carrying a sandwich in a paper bag, he squeezed past Marcus and sat between him and Lily, which Lily permitted with the measured graciousness of a child who has decided someone has earned the proximity. He watched 2 matches while eating his sandwich. Then he said, to nobody specifically, "Taylor wants to compete." Ethan looked at him. "When did she say that?" Ethan said. "Thursday," Jonah said. "After class. She asked me what it takes to enter a competition. I told her I'd find out." Lily leaned around Jonah and looked at Marcus. "Who's Taylor?" "One of our students," Marcus said. 16. Smart and fast and completely unafraid of anything. "She's a little afraid of some things," Jonah said. "She just doesn't show it." "That's not the same as unafraid," Ethan said. "No," Jonah agreed. "It's better." They watched the afternoon matches together. The gymnasium did its gymnasium thing, the noise and the movement and the specific energy of a space full of people invested in outcomes. Dave Kowalski was there with Robbie, who was watching the junior matches with the focused attention of a kid filing information for future use. Dave saw Ethan from across the gymnasium and raised a hand. Ethan raised a hand back. Phil Granger arrived at 2 and found them in the 3rd row. He looked at the configuration: Ethan, Lily, Jonah, Marcus, the 4 of them in a row with the easy agency of people who have spent time together, and the expression on his face did something that he did not comment on. He sat down next to Ethan. "How's the airfield?" he said. "New management is competent," Ethan said. "Better than competent. The FAA reviewer said the transition has been cleaner than most." "And Howell, awaiting trial," Ethan said. "His lawyer is exploring a plea arrangement." Phil nodded. "Watch the mat." "You did right," Phil said. "The whole thing. The reporting, the documentation. Holding the line when he pushed back." "I did what was in front of me to do," Ethan said. "That's what doing right is," Phil said. "Most people complicate it." They watched the afternoon match in progress, 2 junior competitors, evenly matched, running a clean technical exchange that was genuinely good to watch. Not spectacular, not theatrical, just 2 kids who had spent real time learning something and were now applying it. Lily watched with her chin in her hand. "They're good," she said. "They are," Ethan agreed. "Will Taylor be that good?" Ethan thought about Taylor, the 16-year-old, with the radar and the direct assessment, and the capacity to cut through every layer of pretense to the actual question. The one who had told Jonah she'd try his class, based on the fact that he'd lost to the old guy. "Taylor will be better," Ethan said. Lily considered this. Turned back to the mat. Good, she said. The moment that settled it happened between matches. In the specific pause that gymnasiums have between bouts, the equipment adjustment, the judge consultation, the brief quiet before the next thing. Darius walked in. He was not alone. Amara was with him. Was usual. What was not usual was that he was wearing the youth center's training shirt, a simple gray shirt that Sandra had ordered for the program, with the center's name on the back and nothing on the front. It was the first time Ethan had seen him wear it outside the center. Darius had come to watch the matches. He had come because Jonah had mentioned it Thursday, and he had taken the information home and evidently decided to do something with it, which was a thing Darius had been doing, with increasing frequency, taking information and acting on it. Instead of filing it away behind the folded arms and elevated chin, he scanned the stands, found Jonah, moved toward him with the purposeful directness of a kid who has decided where he's going. You said there'd be junior matches, Darius said. There are, Jonah said. Afternoon session just started. Darius looked at the mat, at the two junior competitors warming up. That could be me, he said. Not as a question. As a fact, he was trying on for size, checking whether it fit. Yeah, Jonah said. It could. Darius looked at Ethan. Ethan looked back. How long, Darius said. Depends on the work, Ethan said. For competition, a year. Maybe. Maybe less for you. Why less for me? Because you're not scared of being wrong, Ethan said. That's the thing that slows most people down the most. Darius was quiet. Amara tugged his sleeve. Sit down, she said. I want to watch. He sat down. She sat beside him. The match started. Ethan watched Darius watch the match, the quality of attention on the boy's face, the way he tracked the movement, the small unconscious adjustments of his own posture when something landed. He was learning by watching. He was already doing it. Phil leaned toward Ethan and said quietly, That's the one. Yeah, Ethan said. He's got something. He's got a lot, Ethan said. He just needed somewhere to put it. Phil looked at the mat, at Darius, back at Ethan. Same as someone else I know, Phil said. Ethan said nothing. Phil smiled at the mat and let it go. The afternoon wound down the way good days do gradually. Without drama, the light changing outside the gymnasium's high windows from the flat brightness of midday to the longer gold of late afternoon. Matches concluded. Scores were announced. Winners were congratulated, and runners-up were clapped for. The room began the slow process of dispersing into the evening. Marcus stayed until near the end. He helped Lily carry a bag of equipment to Ethan's car. She had brought things for a training session they were going to do afterward. Just the two of them, the Saturday routine that had been uninterrupted for 5 years, and would continue to be. She handed Marcus the bag with the matter-of-fact trust of someone who has decided you are reliable, which, from Lily Walker, was a more significant credential than most people understood. Jonah said goodbye and went to his car, already texting someone about the match he'd watched, already processing. Phil shook Ethan's hand and said something quiet that Marcus couldn't hear. Ethan nodded. Phil left. Marcus and Ethan stood in the parking lot. The young fighter, Marcus said. The flashy one. He won his division. I know, Ethan said. He's good, Marcus said. He really is good. He is, Ethan agreed. He just doesn't know what it's for yet. Ethan looked at him. No, he said. He doesn't. Marcus looked at the gymnasium building, at the glass doors, at the parking lot where his truck had been parked 3 months ago and a lifetime ago, when the worst idea he'd had in years was still just a feeling in his chest and a phone in his hand. I'm going to compete again, Marcus said. Eventually. When it's right. I know, Ethan said. Will it be different? Ethan thought about it. Not the quick answer. The real one. Yes, he said. Everything will look the same from the outside. You'll step on the mat and you'll face someone, and there will be judges and a score. But what's underneath it will be different. You'll be competing because you love the thing, not because you need the room to confirm something. He paused. That's when it gets really good. Marcus nodded slowly. How do you know when you're there? He said. You stop checking the room, Ethan said. They stood in the parking lot a moment longer. Lily came out of the gymnasium with a second bag she'd retrieved and stood between them with the comfortable ease of a kid who has stopped finding the presence of Marcus Reed unusual. She looked up at Marcus. "Are you coming to Tuesday?" she said. "Yes," Marcus said. "And Thursday?" "Yes." She nodded. Satisfied. She looked at her father. "Can we stop for the good tacos on the way to practice?" she said. "That's 20 minutes in the wrong direction," Ethan said. "I know," she said. He looked at her. "Yeah," he said, "okay." She walked to the car. Marcus watched her go, watched Ethan follow. Watched the ordinary motion of a father and daughter moving through a parking lot on a Saturday afternoon, the bag, the keys, the small negotiation about tacos, the ease of two people who have built something together over years and know the weight of it and carry it without thinking about the weight. He thought about the gymnasium 3 months ago, about the man he'd pointed at, about the decision to make a stranger prove himself in front of 200 people because the stranger's stillness had looked, to the version of Marcus who existed then, like an accusation. He thought about everything that had followed. He got in his own car. He sat for a moment. Then he started the engine and drove toward nothing specific, which was a thing he hadn't known how to do 3 months ago, to move without a destination that needed proving, without a room that needed confirming what he was, without the coal in his chest demanding to be fed. He drove through the San Diego afternoon, and the city moved past his windows the way cities do when you have finally stopped fighting them. And he thought about Darius, saying, "That could be me." And Taylor asking why Jonah had lost to the old guy and deciding that was a good enough reason to try. And Phil Granger's network connecting people across 30 years of service. And Sandra Ortega running a center on 20 years of her own life. And Dave Kowalski standing in a doorway with something he'd witnessed and not yet understood, finding his way toward understanding. He thought about Ethan Walker, who had spent 22 years developing the capacity to end threats before they fully formed, and had sat in a gymnasium with a paper cup of bad coffee and chosen, entirely deliberately, to be the man that nobody noticed, not because he had to, because he understood what it cost to be the other kind. The real measure of strength had never been what you could do when you decided to do it. Anyone could learn to do damage. The years of training, the discipline, the sacrifice, those things produced capacity. But capacity was only the beginning of the question. The question was what you built with it. Ethan Walker had built a daughter who noticed when he held his coffee wrong and asked real questions and already understood, at 10 years old, that the most important thing about power was the decision behind it. He had built a Tuesday and a Thursday. He had built Darius saying that could be me in a gray shirt with a center's name on the back. He had built a former adversary driving through the city on a Saturday afternoon, learning for the first time how to move without needing the room to confirm him. That was strength. Not the mat, not the 41 wins, not the classified operations, or the training curriculum, or the things that still didn't appear on any public record. The quiet man in the third row who knew exactly what he was capable of, and chose, every single day, to spend it on something that would outlast the knowing. That was the whole of it. That was enough.